pushing for it since 2008. Would he support a clear plan of targeted Wales-specific VAT cuts for specific sectors, for tourism, for home improvements, so that our small employer economy can recover as quickly as possible?
Very grateful to the intervention, and I'm going to goad the Honourable Lady into having to wait a little longer to hear what the Chancellor has to say in his statement at 12:30. However, I would just point out to her that at every possible opportunity, the UK government, I emphasise the UK government, has embraced jobs, livelihoods, businesses across Wales in a way that is unprecedented in modern times. And I'm sure even as a nationalist, she would like to thank the UK government and the Chancellor for those very special efforts that they've made on behalf of the people of Wales.
Here's your chance. Liz Roberts.
The Minister has very kindly answered my question with a question. I will take it, because he hasn't said no, that he is interested in Wales-specific VAT reductions, and look forward to talking to him about that more. But another initiative that we could introduce in Wales, countries such as Malta and Poland have introduced voucher schemes to encourage domestic tourism to help the recovery. Ahead of the Chancellor's statement, would the Secretary of State support the introduction of a Welsh tourism voucher scheme to be spent on outdoor attractions, accommodation, transport, trains and buses, a much-needed boost to make the tourism industry work for the people of Wales?
Speaker, the first part of the Honourable Lady's question is, I think, aiming too low. And by referring to Wales as just a tourism industry in its own right, doesn't go anywhere near embracing the opportunities that tourism in Wales has and the jobs associated with it as part of the union, as part of the union push. And my message to her is just to have a look at the interventions that UK government has so far made, let alone anything which may come later today, so far made in support of that and many other industries. It's a bit like a sketch, you know, what have the Romans ever done for us? I urge her to look at those figures, because I think she will be as pleased as the rest of the House is.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Arnismore is the most dependent of any constituency on tourism. Jobs, skilled employment and investment is what my island constituency of Arnismore needs if this government is to deliver its levelling up agenda. Will the Secretary of State commit to helping our island by championing Arnismore's capacity to play a leading role in the decarbonisation of the UK economy?
My own friend is that there is no greater champion of Arnismore than her on this and numerous other issues, in fact. In particular, her work around Wilfyn has been outstanding and ongoing. I would say to her, as I'm afraid I've become boring in saying to other members, is I urge her to remain in her seat for just a little longer, because I think some of the comments and subjects that she's raised may get a greater airing later.
Shadow Minister Gerald Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As we know, the tourism and hospitality sector has been hit very hard by this pandemic, and despite the best efforts of operators across Wales, this year will be a very difficult one for those in the industry. So can the Secretary of State get the government to act now and extend the furlough scheme for the tourism sector to avoid workers facing a cliff edge later on in the year?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, there have been significant interventions already, a £2.4 billion worth of barnetised income for Welsh Government, plus over twice that in terms of the other interventions which the Welsh workforce has benefited from, in particular tourism and hospitality. And 1 in 3 workers in Wales are currently being supported by the furlough scheme. It is not for me to comment on what the Chancellor may or may not be saying in a few minutes' time. And like so many other questions this morning, I can only say if he could remain patient for as long as possible, he may find some interesting comments to be made.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, tourism is extremely important to Mid Wales. I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for meeting some of my local businesses recently. Many of them could benefit from the £59 million generated by the Culture Secretary's recent announcement. But I'm deeply concerned that the Welsh Government could stick to form and only channel this money towards Cardiff-based tourist and culture attractions. Would my right honourable friend reassure me that he will do all he can to ensure that Mid Wales will see the benefit of this money, which is, after all, Mid Wales' money?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend's comments. Of course, I can offer that commitment, but the commitment is to urge Welsh Government to make those important decisions for the whole of Wales. And I know in our own area, having had the pleasure of meeting some of our industries the other days, that critical events like the Royal Welsh Show are hugely culturally important, and it is absolutely right that Welsh Government should look at the whole of Wales and not be tempted into just supporting a few well-known industries around its sort of favoured patch.
Stephen Crabb.
16, sir.
Mr. Speaker, the government's support to business, the £350 billion package, is helping to limit the long-term damage to the economy, and my department will continue to work with others in Whitehall and the Welsh Government to drive forward that economic recovery. As the Prime Minister said last week, we must build to ensure jobs and growth as we continue to ease lockdown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wales desperately needs new projects to deliver growth and better quality work. So can I ask my honourable friend if he would look at the proposals coming from the joint venture based in Pembrokeshire between Total and Simply Blue Energy for deploying floating offshore wind technology in the Celtic Sea? And can I ask him to use his office to ensure that Treasury and BEIS stay fully involved, because there's a serious project there that I think is worth backing?
Mr. Speaker, I entirely agree with the honourable member. I think floating offshore wind is a hugely exciting technology. I'd be happy to meet with those companies. And may I say that our commitment to offshore wind is demonstrated by the £28 million which we, along with Welsh Government, have invested in the Pembroke Dock Marine project.
We come to Ben Lake.
Mr. Speaker, recognising the severity of the economic damage of COVID-19 and also the importance of swift responses from the government, will the Minister consider proposals made by the Wales Governance Centre recently that both the annual drawdown limit from the Welsh Reserve and the cap on Welsh Government borrowing should be, I quote, very significantly relaxed or removed?
Minister.
Well, diolch yn fawr iawn am y question. Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman will be aware that my friend, that my right honourable friend has already signed off around about an extra £800 million for Welsh Government. And if he can wait in his seat for a little while longer, there may be more good news to come.
Dr. James Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Economic recovery in North Wales will be made all the harder by the devastating news that Airbus in Broughton is to shed 1,435 jobs. I know the UK government is already supporting the UK aerospace industry significantly, but can the Minister confirm what further the government can do to assist Airbus?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that when I and my right honourable friend spoke to the leaders of Airbus last week, they were very grateful to the UK government and said that the UK government had been one of the most supportive governments in the world, which is why, no doubt, the numbers of jobs being lost in the United Kingdom is far less than in other European Union countries. The Airbus have benefited from around £5 billion of UK government support, and I'm absolutely certain the government will want to continue to support the aerospace sector.
Alan Brown.
19, Mr. Speaker.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 19 and 20 together. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Wales, myself discuss our future relationship with the EU as part of multiple engagements with Welsh Government. We will continue to work and listen closely to Welsh Government throughout the trade deal negotiations. It is, of course, a reserved matter, but we always listen carefully to what Welsh Government have to say.
Alan Brown.
Yeah, listen, but probably don't do anything, Mr. Speaker. Michelle Barnier told the Lord Select Committee that the EU will introduce full border checks for the UK in January the 1st, regardless of the UK's position. Now, given exports to the EU from Wales account for 60% of Welsh exports, this will cause huge disruption. Has he secured any additional support for Welsh exporters? Is it Brexit at all costs, and who cares about the Welsh export?
Hear, hear.
Well, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that Welsh exports, and indeed from Scotland and all other parts of the United Kingdom, are able to be traded freely across the world, including with our former partners in the European Union, is a top priority for the government. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman appears to be asking for some sort of extension to the current deal that we have. He had the opportunity to do that on 3 occasions last year. I voted on every occasion for a deal that would have given a permanent extension. His party voted against it.
Let us head up to Motherwell, to Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent ONS survey found that 46% of Welsh businesses had 6 months less cash reserves, the highest percentage of the UK nations. Without additional support, the looming threat of no deal in less than 6 months could be the final blow for many businesses. How will the Secretary of State explain to businesses that his government actively decided to build additional barriers by ruling out an extension when they were already struggling?
Well, I have to remind the Honourable Lady once again that the SNP had the opportunity to vote for the whole of the United Kingdom to remain in a semi-permanent customs union until a deal had been struck. And frankly, they decided to vote against it, taking a gamble that they could destroy Brexit completely. They lost the gamble. It is far too late now for them to ask for their state back. We are leaving the European Union at the end of this year, as we promised to do in our manifesto. Thank you very much.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the years, the Erasmus scheme has benefited many young people in Newport West. The Welsh Labour Government has repeatedly requested that Wales should be able to participate in programmes like Erasmus, even if the Conservatives in England stopped England from doing so. So can the Minister confirm whether this important request from a devolved government has been relayed by the UK negotiators, and if not, why not?
Great question. Mr. Speaker, I have to declare a slight personal interest because my wife, I think, was on an Erasmus scheme when I met her as a student some 20 or so years ago. And of course, at that time, she was part of a country that was not, she was a citizen of a country not then in the European Union. So I can absolutely assure the Honourable Lady that I and my colleagues, whatever the future is of Erasmus, are determined to enable young people to be able to travel and study not just in the European Union, but outside of the European Union as well.
President Minister. Mark Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I had regular discussions with the Welsh Government on the effect of their lockdown restrictions on levels of employment in Wales. This Government is continuing to provide unprecedented support to businesses and employees in Wales, and as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Wales, has already said, now is the time to look to reopen Wales and keep people in their jobs.
Mark Harper.
I'm grateful for that answer. The Minister will know that the rules on pubs and restaurants operating in Wales are currently more restrictive than in England. So can I urge him to say to his constituents, at least for the time being, if they want to attend safely pubs and restaurants, they're very welcome in the Forest of Dean to safeguard jobs and livelihoods. And in passing, Mr. Speaker, I understand the First Minister's a great fan of cheese, in which case I can recommend Stinking Bishop from Dimmock in my constituency, which Claudia Winkleman, no less, christened the King of Cheese.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right, the honourable gentleman and myself agree on many things, but perhaps might have to beg to differ over whether tourists should come to the Forest of Dean or Wales. I want them to be welcomed in Wales, and I look forward to the Welsh Government reopening the tourism industry in Wales as quickly as possible to save the 160,000 jobs that depend on it.
23, Mr. Speaker.
The Right Honourable Friend, the Secretary of State, has regular discussions with my Right Honourable Friend, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy on support for Welsh businesses. The Honourable Lady will no doubt be aware that we have put forward a £350 billion scheme to support businesses and jobs across the United Kingdom, and much of that will go to Wales.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister join me in welcoming the Welsh Government's economic contract, which means that any business that receives financial support must demonstrate its commitment to growth, fair work, employee health and skills, and reducing carbon footprint?
Mr. Speaker, I hope the Honourable Lady and everyone in this House will join me in congratulating the United Kingdom Government for bringing forward a furlough scheme that has protected 300,000 jobs in Wales, a self-employment scheme that's protected 100,000 jobs. In addition, we've had bounce-back loans, C-bills, CL bills, and last week we protected another 800 jobs itself.
Come on, Minister, you're going to help me get...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually welcome some of the wartime socialism policies of this government, based on Gordon Brown's rescue packages of the last Labour government, which were then so cruelly undermined by the Tory government that followed. But there is room for more fiscal measures, including perhaps looking at VAT on events as a way of trying to stimulate that industry. Will he, when a Chancellor sits down next to him, just whisper in his ear and tell him to do that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to accept the honourable gentleman's support for Conservative Party policies, and if he could just restrain himself for another half hour or so, he may well discover there is yet more good news for businesses and individuals in Wales. Diolch yn fawr.
Substantive Beth Winter, Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I sincerely empathise with the victims of recent flooding, especially as many of the same areas were affected more recently. Flood defence is a devolved matter. However, we have made available £16 million to Welsh Government through the Barnett formula as a result of flood defences in England.
We now head over to Beth Winter. Beth Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The unprecedented flooding this year has disproportionately affected Welsh communities, including my own constituency of Cynon Valley. The government has now acknowledged the flooding problems caused and indicated that UK government support for Welsh communities will come from UK reserve. However, in response to my honourable friend, the member for Merthyr Tydfil, the government informed the House on the 15th of June that the support would be subject to the Barnett formula. Can the Secretary of State confirm that UK government funding for flooding in Wales will come from the UK reserve in line with the ethos of support and solidarity central to our union, and that it will not be subject to the Barnett formula? Can you also clarify the amount that will be funded and when?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. In the interest of brevity, can I just inform the Honourable Lady that discussions are ongoing on this subject and she will be hearing more from the relevant bodies in the near future.
Right, we are now, that's the end of the Welsh questions. We're now heading over to questions to the Prime Minister. And we start with question 1 from Anna McMorran.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Anna McMorran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am shocked and angered at workers in UK clothing factories like Boohoo being paid a mere £3.50 an hour and being forced to work in totally unacceptable conditions. In the 21st century, there must be no room for exploitation and modern slavery. We must call time on fast fashion for the sake of people and our planet. So my question is simple, Mr. Speaker. What will the Prime Minister do about it?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, it's this Conservative government that set up laws against modern slavery. It's this Conservative government that massively increased the living wage, not only instituted the living wage, but massively increased it. And we would hope that it would be the Labour Mayor of Leicester who would stand up for the interests of the workforce in his community, and that's what we will do.
We're heading to the shadows of Lichfield Cathedral with Michael Fabricant. Michael Fabricant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's not just the 800-year-old Lichfield Cathedral that we have. We've also got the beautiful leafy lanes, wonderful restaurants and bars. But I'll tell you what we also have, and that is the Lichfield Garrick, which is a major theatre in the area, the Hub at St Mary's. And so what I'd like to know is this. I welcome the £1.7 billion grant that's being given to support our theatres and performing artists. But are we going to see any of it at all outside of the West End and here in Lichfield?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend. I can tell him that Lichfield has been at the centre of our cultural life since Dr. Johnson and David Garrick made their famous walk and ride from Lichfield to London in the 18th century, and will continue to be so. And we are working closely with Arts Council England to support and develop the projects that I know are so dear to his heart.
Is said to Leader of the Opposition with the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, when asked why care home deaths had been so high, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Too many care homes didn't really follow the procedures in the way that they could have. That's caused huge offence to frontline care workers. It's now been 48 hours. Will the Prime Minister apologise to care workers?"
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and the last thing I want to do is to blame care workers for what has happened, or for any of them to think that I was blaming them, because they worked hard, incredibly hard throughout this crisis, looking after some of the most vulnerable people in our country and doing an outstanding job. And as he knows, tragically, 257 of them have lost their lives. And when it comes to taking blame, I take full responsibility for what has happened. But the one thing that nobody knew early on during this pandemic was that the virus was being passed asymptomatically from person to person in the way that it is. And that's why the guidance and the procedures changed. And it's thanks to the hard work of care workers that we've now got incidents down in our care homes, outbreaks down in our care homes to the lowest level since the crisis began. That's thanks to our care workers, and I pay tribute to them.
Mr. Speaker, that's not an apology, and it just won't wash. The Prime Minister said, his words, too many care homes didn't really follow the procedures in the way that they could have. It was clear what he was saying, and the Prime Minister must understand just how raw this is for many people on the front line and for those, Mr. Speaker, who've lost loved ones. I quote Mark Adams, who runs a social care charity, who spoke yesterday. He said this: you've got 1.6 million social care workers going into work to protect our parents, our grandparents, our children, putting their own health and potentially lives at risk. And then, to get perhaps the most senior man in the country turning round and blaming them on what has been an absolute travesty of leadership from the government, I just think it's appalling. They're his words. Ask the Prime Minister again, will he apologise to care workers, yes or no?
Speaker, he keeps saying that I blamed or tried to blame care workers, and that is simply not the case. The reality is that we now know things about the way a coronavirus is passed from person to person without symptoms that we just didn't know. That's why we instituted the Care Home Action Plan on April the 15th. That's why we changed the procedures, and perhaps he did know that it was being transmitted asymptomatically. I didn't hear it at the time. Perhaps Captain Hindsight would like to tell us whether he knew that it was being transmitted asymptomatically. Of course, it was necessary to change our procedures. I want to thank our care workers for what they have done, and this government will continue to invest massively in our care homes, in our care workers. And by the way, it's this government that put up, as I said just now, this government that put up the living wage by record amounts. And that is something that we can do directly to help every care worker in the country.
Keir Starmer.
By refusing to apologise, the Prime Minister rubs salt into the wounds of the very people that he stood at his front door and clapped. The Prime Minister and the Health Secretary must be the only people left in the country who think that they put a protective ring around care homes. Those on the front line know that that wasn't the case. I quote one care home manager from ITN News yesterday. She said this: I'm absolutely livid at the fact that he says we didn't follow the procedures, because the care assistants, the nurses, everyone in the care home have worked so hard, and then he's got the audacity to blame us. Her words. What would the Prime Minister like to say to that care home manager?
What I would like to say to the lady in question, and indeed to every care home worker in the country, is that this government appreciates the incredible work that they have done. We thank them for the incredible work they have done. And let me say further that we will invest in our care homes and we will reform the care home sector. And I hope, by the way, Mr. Speaker, that we'll do it on the basis of cross-party consensus and get a lasting solution to the problems in our care homes and the difficulties many people face in funding the cost of their old age. That's what we want to do. That's what this government is pledged to do after 30 years of inaction, and I hope that he will join us in doing it.
Keir Starmer.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I gently point out that his government has been in power for 10 years with no plan and no white paper. Of course we'll join in plans for reforming healthcare, but for social care, but 10 years wasted. The reality is this: more than 19,000 care home residents have died from COVID-19. It's a far higher number when you include excess deaths. Overall, around 1 in 20 care home residents are estimated to have died from the virus. 1 in 20. It's chilling. These are extraordinary numbers. Yet the Prime Minister has consistently ducked responsibility for this. Will he accept it isn't care workers who are to blame, it's his government?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know, and I think he's got the old vice of reading out the pre-prepared question without listening to the answer I've just given. I've made it absolutely clear that this government takes responsibility for everything that we've done throughout this crisis, and of course I pay tribute once again to the work of every care worker in the country, and I thank them. But what we've also done is put forward a care home action plan that has helped our care workers, our care home industry, to get the incidence of coronavirus right down in every care home in the country to the lowest level. And we're now putting in monthly testing for every resident in our care home and weekly testing for every care home worker. And that is thanks to the fantastic efforts of everybody involved in NHS testing and tracing. And I think, by the way, he should pay tribute to them as well.
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister continues to insult those on the front line by not taking these issues seriously. The Prime Minister must recognise that huge mistakes have been made. 2 months ago, at PMQs, I highlighted the weakness of early guidance on care homes. The Prime Minister, typically flippant, simply said it's not true. There were repeated warnings from the care sector, repeated delays in providing protective equipment. This wasn't hindsight. They were raised here day in, day out, week in, week out. It wasn't hindsight, it was real time for the front line. Same on routine testing. And the decision to discharge 25,000 people to care homes without tests was clearly a mistake. Will the Prime Minister simply accept that his government was just too slow to act on care homes? Full stop.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman knows very well, or he should know very well, that the understanding of the disease changed dramatically in the months that we've had it. And when he looks at the action plan that we brought in to help our care workers, I think he would appreciate the vast amount of work that they have done, the PPE that they've been supplied with, the testing that they've been supplied with. That has helped them to get the incidence of the disease down to record lows. And it has enabled us to get on with our work as the government in getting this country through this epidemic, getting this country back on its feet. That's what this country wants to see. We've stuck to our plan to open up our economy gradually and cautiously. One week he's in favour of it, the next week he's against it. What this country wants to see is a steady, stable approach to getting our country back on its feet. That is what we are delivering.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, to add further insult to injury, there are reports this morning the government is to remove free hospital parking for NHS workers in England. The Prime Minister will know that this could cost hundreds of pounds a month for our nurses, our doctors, our carers and our support staff. We owe our NHS workers so much. We all clap for them. We should be rewarding them, not making it more expensive to go to work. The Prime Minister must know this is wrong. Will he reconsider and rule it out?
Mr. Speaker, the hospital car parks are free for NHS staff for this pandemic. They're free now, and we are going to get on with our manifesto commitment to make them free for patients who need them as well. And the House will know that that was never the case under the Labour government. Neither for staff, nor for patients. May I respectfully suggest that he takes his latest bandwagon and parks it free somewhere else, Mr. Speaker. One week he's backing us, the next week he's not. 1 week he's in favour of a tax on wealth and tax on homes. The next week he tries to tiptoe away from it. We know how it works. He takes one brief 1 week, one brief the next. He's consistent only in his opportunism, whereas we get on with our agenda. Build for jobs, and the House will hear more about it shortly, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my well-known and much-loved constituent, Alan Young, died of cancer last year, having been cared for at Myton Hospice in Warwick. And I'm sure the Prime Minister will remember the very moving letter that he received from Alan's brave 9-year-old son, Tommy, which Tommy read out on local radio, praising Myton for looking after his dad and asking for them to receive support. Now, the government's providing £200 million per quarter for hospices during the current emergency, so it's very clear that the Prime Minister appreciates their work. And will he join me, Tommy, his brother Shay and his mum Kelly in thanking Myton and all hospices across the country for the invaluable care they provide to people like Alan?
Mr. Speaker, I do indeed remember that letter, and I know the thoughts and sympathies of the whole House will be with Alan and his family. I would like to join Tommy and Shay and Kelly and indeed my honourable friend in thanking all hospices for the incredible work that they do.
Let us head to Scotland to visit the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Ian Blackford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure you, the Prime Minister, and indeed the whole House will want to join me in marking Srebrenica Memorial Day, which takes place this Saturday and for the first time happening online. We should never forget the terrible genocide that took place 25 years ago. And can I associate myself with the concerns about Tory hospital parking charges? The SNP government abolished them in Scotland 12 years ago, and I would urge the Tory government to do the same so NHS workers and patients will not be penalised. Mr. Speaker, 3.8 million people across the United Kingdom could face unemployment when the furlough scheme ends. The job retention scheme has been a lifeline to millions, yet we could see progress unravel as the scheme ends. Millions of people could potentially find themselves out of work, struggling to pay bills and to put food on the table. Will the Prime Minister commit today to extending the furlough scheme? People must not lose their jobs because the Tories refuse to act.
Mr. Speaker, I think most people looking at what has happened in the UK over the last 3 or 4 months around the world have been overwhelmingly impressed by the way that we, as a government, have put our arms around people. £164 billion invested in jobs, in incomes, in supporting people. It's been a massive, massive effort. I think, Mr. Speaker, and I know that a lot of people in this House would agree with me, I think that you cannot go on forever with a furlough scheme that keeps employees in suspended animation in the way that it does. We need to get our economy moving again. That's what I think the people of this country want to see in a sustainable and cautious way. And I would just remind him, I'm sure he's constantly saying this, I would just remind him that the reason the job retention scheme has worked, the furlough scheme has worked, is because of the power and the efficiency of the UK Treasury. It's the UK government that has funded the furlough scheme, and 4.8 billion, I should say, in Barnett consequentials to Scotland alone. I'm sure he doesn't hesitate to remind his colleagues of that.
We return to Scotland again with Ian Blackford. I'm sure he'll reappear.
Mr. Speaker, of course, it's about the future and it's about making sure that people can be protected. Just this week, we've seen Spain look to extend their furlough scheme into 2021. Research has shown that prematurely ending the job retention scheme risks higher unemployment and weaker productivity, with a potential loss of up to £50 billion to GDP. The Resolution Foundation are calling for £3 to £5 billion to be spent on extending furlough payments for the hardest hit sectors, and the TUC are warning of the effect of ending the furlough scheme early would have people that are shielding in difficulties. Mr. Speaker, this is about not throwing away the benefits that we have accrued. The Prime Minister seems intent on sinking the lifeboat that has been keeping so many people afloat. If the Prime Minister will not extend the furlough scheme, will he give Scotland the powers so we can do it ourselves?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've answered the right honourable gentleman's question already, but perhaps because I believe it's absolutely essential that we not only invest in our people and protect them from the effects of this epidemic, as we have done, a huge expenditure, quite rightly, but it's also essential that we get the economy moving, including in Scotland, and I hope he supports that objective as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me and my constituents that calls from some in this House for a raid on homes, pensions and savings would hammer hard-working families and undermine Britain's economic recovery?
Absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, and I've been amazed to hear that Labour are proposing to bring forward a wealth tax, a tax on homes. New leader, same old Labour policies. Exactly what this country doesn't need. What we need is investment in people. We need investment in their wages, increasing the living wage, taking this country forward. We want a tax. They want a tax. We want jobs.
Let's head to Northern Ireland with Colm Eastwood. Colm Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the devastating impact of Brexit on my constituency and the decades of underinvestment and neglect by successive British governments, will the Prime Minister agree to work with the Northern Ireland Executive to ensure a free port area is developed in Derry to try to address that long-term economic imbalance? And will he agree to meet with me and a delegation from the city to progress this project?
I note the paradox, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable gentleman wants a free port in Londonderry, which is something that can only be achieved by Brexit, by the way. But I'm more than happy to study the plans that he proposes, and we'll see what we can do to take it forward.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Mr. Speaker, the coronavirus has hit young people in work and those about to enter the jobs market particularly hard. Would my right honourable friend therefore continue to build on his excellent package of announcements so far, so that our young people have hope and encouragement for the very best prospects to the start of their working life?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend. We want young people to have the self-confidence and the experience of work to keep learning on the job and to get the jobs that they need. And if you'll wait just a few minutes, he'll be hearing rather more from my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, about that very matter.
Let us return to Scotland and drop in on Angela Crawley. Angela Crawley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds of my constituents have been excluded from the furlough scheme or support for self-employed due to gaps in the legislation. Barriers to this support include real-time information cut-off dates and the 50% cap on non-trading income. The government's solution to these constituents is to take out loans, which for many is untenable and will lead to unemployment and bankruptcy. Will the Prime Minister commit to widening access to these schemes for the many people left behind?
Mr. Speaker, I would just tell the honourable lady that there are in fact 12,000 people who've taken advantage of the furlough scheme in her constituency, getting 80% of their income, up to £2,500 a month. It's a massive scheme. And in addition, for those that she rightly identifies who may have had difficulties accessing furlough, we've also massively increased universal credit, up by £1,040 for families across the country, in addition to a panoply of other loans and grants that we have made.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will join me in thanking Richard Parker, the CEO of Doncaster and Bassetlaw Trust Hospital, and his staff for all their hard work during the COVID pandemic. Yet does the Prime Minister agree with me that Doncaster needs a new hospital? And does he also believe that by building a new hospital in the town, the government will send a clear message to the people of Don Valley that it is committed to levelling up the north?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for a very apposite question, because the Health Secretary is indeed committed not just to building 40 new hospitals, but to visiting Doncaster very shortly to discuss investment in healthcare in Doncaster.
Sorry, Reg Larkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Luton Airport provides direct funding to Luton Council and to many local charities in my constituency, but COVID-19 has hugely impacted this commercial and charitable income. Without urgent government action, Luton Council will be forced into making £22 million of in-year cuts next week. I've raised this issue repeatedly in Parliament on behalf of thousands of Lutonians. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how emergency funding for Luton Council will save crucial local services and hundreds of key workers' jobs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she raises a very important issue, because the aviation industry has been very hard hit, and that's why we're supporting the sector in all kinds of ways, not just by supporting employees, but also the time to pay scheme and loans from the Bank of England and indeed the government to aviation. The best way, and of course we're supporting local councils as well with billions of pounds, 3.2 billions of pounds for local councils. But the most important thing is to get a medium and long-term solution that enables those airlines to start flying again, so that Luton Council can get the revenues that it needs. I perfectly understand and support the point she makes.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been said, I hope not uncharitably, that my right honourable friends never met a bridge that he didn't want to build. Off the Cumbrian coast, we've got an opportunity to steal a march with a tidal barrage which would supply 5% of the UK's energy needs in a green, sustainable way. It would leave a legacy of jobs in Copeland, Barrow-in-Furness and Workington and leave 7,000 jobs. It would allow us to connect communities that have got a terrible transport network at the moment with a shiny new bridge, and it would allow us to build our way into a green revolution. Would the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and my Cumbrian colleagues to explore this deal further?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for bringing that attractive idea to my attention. I know that several projects are being considered along the Cumbrian coast, and I'd advise him first to get in touch with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to see what he can do to take it forward, and I will give what support I can.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, after a delay of over a year, the government published their response to their call for evidence regarding violence and abuse against shop workers. In that period of time, there have been 150,000 such incidents. It's completely unacceptable. There's a lot of very good things in the government's response, but it is disappointing that they've stopped short of a change in the law. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister make a commitment that if his plans don't reduce the 400 plus incidents every day within 6 months, he will support legislative change?
Mr. Speaker, I think we should have absolutely zero tolerance for violence or aggression to people who work in shops, just as we have zero tolerance for people who are aggressive towards those who work in our public services, and we will do everything we can to ensure that is the case.
Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was a welcome relaxation of lockdown rules on Saturday, but some sectors such as health and beauty, performing arts, language schools, events providers and wedding industry are still not able to open. Could I ask my right honourable friend if he'll publish a timetable so there can be some hope and certainty for these industries?
My right honourable friend raises a very, very important point. We, as he knows, on May the 10th, we set out our plan for cautiously getting our economy open again, and we will be saying more later this week about the next steps and the timetable that we hope to follow.
Heading to Bedford to drop in on Mohammed Yassin. Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A care home owner in my constituency was told if they refuse to accept the return from a hospital of a COVID-positive patient, they would be discharged to an unfamiliar home. The procedure the owner was obliged to follow was this government's. So rather than point the finger at care workers for his failures, will the Prime Minister do the right thing, apologise and pay tribute to the professionalism of the care home owners, managers and staff in Bedford who went above and beyond this government guidelines to save lives?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman, and I renew the points that I made earlier on, the tribute I pay to care home workers. The particular case that he raises is important and troubling, so if he would be kind enough to write to me with details setting out exactly what happened, I will be very happy to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've seen the most amazing upsurge in community spirit in this country, with hundreds of, thousands and millions of people coming together to support their neighbours. Does my right honourable friend agree that we need to sustain this community spirit into the future, and that means supporting the social infrastructure of local places like libraries and youth clubs and community businesses, and it also means Whitehall giving away power so that finally local communities can take back control?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for everything that he's done to champion the voluntary sector community spirit over many years, and I've followed his campaigns with interest and with support, and I do think there is now an opportunity to build on the way the nation came together during the COVID crisis and to deliver even more of the kind of projects that he wants, and we will certainly be putting our support behind those types of community initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 230,000 renters are going to be at risk of homelessness or eviction as we emerge from lockdown. Will the Prime Minister urgently today lay legislation so that cross-party we can support those people at risk of homelessness before we break up for the summer recess?
Prime Minister. Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady, and she's right to draw attention to one of the most remarkable features of the COVID crisis, which was the way the country and the government were able to help thousands and thousands of homeless people to find accommodation. And we saw in other countries where they were less fortunate, there were, I'm afraid, serious epidemics amongst the homeless. Thankfully, we have so far avoided that. And we are taking forward plans with Dame Louise Casey, with my honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government. We are taking forward plans to ensure that the 15,000 do not just come back onto the streets, but we do everything we can to stamp out homelessness in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Kings Lynn serves over 300,000 people across Norfolk, Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire. In the 40th anniversary of a hospital only built to last 30 years, does my right honourable friend agree that the dedication shown by staff in responding to coronavirus deserves to be recognised by including the Queen Elizabeth in our new hospital building programme?
Mr. Speaker, of course, this government was elected to build 40 new hospitals, and that is what we can. That's what we are going to do. My honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, will be setting out the list. But I can also tell him that Queen Elizabeth Hospital was awarded £9 million in October for urgent upgrades to protect vital frontline care, and I'm sure that he will understand that further long-term solutions are now under active consideration.
John Scott. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Prime Minister, for getting things moving on the disclosure and barring scheme. It was also good to hear the Prime Minister belatedly adopting the policy of jobs, jobs, jobs. But does he mean jobs in the UK or in France, Poland, Germany, Korea and China? Because it's all very well announcing, for example, blue passports, but those are now not being produced in the northeast, but by a French company in a Polish factory. So, Prime Minister, will you now take back control and give instructions to the Treasury, to the Cabinet Office, to Whitehall and town halls to actually buy British and protect British jobs, jobs, jobs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend behind me says from a sedentary position, what's he got against Poland? We believe we are creating, we will create hundreds of thousands of jobs in this country. We will actively buy British. We will ensure that contracts go to great British companies, Mr. Speaker. But what we will not do is turn our faces against the notion of international free trade and the market that has brought colossal wealth to the people of this country. Those are the politics, those are the economics of the madhouse, Mr. Speaker.
Steve Baker.
Mr. Speaker, to avoid drama later, we need to complete the process of getting Brexit done in the next few months. So will my right honourable friend therefore please confirm, for the benefit of everyone listening, that nothing in the Northern Ireland Protocol will be allowed to stop the United Kingdom charging our own tariffs for the whole United Kingdom from the 1st of January 2021?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, not a sausage, not a jot, not a tittle of the Northern Irish Protocol will provide any such impediment to the unfettered access of goods and services between all parts of the UK.
It's Savile Roberts.
Mr. Speaker, I am totally on board with the Prime Minister's rhetoric that for too long money has piled into the southeast corner of this island, and investment is needed now to bolster and boost universal confidence. Can he explain, therefore, why his Welsh Secretary took to Twitter this week to argue that Wales is too poor, with too few businesses and taxpayers to be successful? Surely he can't condone the Secretary of State's for Wales off-message pessimism.
Mr. Speaker, I've seldom met anybody who was more boosterish for the future of Wales than the Secretary of State for Wales, and that is because this government is absolutely committed to levelling up throughout the whole UK, in Wales and everywhere, with infrastructure, with investment in education and in technology. And we will do the things, by the way, that the Welsh Government has failed to do, the Welsh Labour Government, I might say, such as unlocking the Bryn Glas tunnels, Mr. Speaker, unblocking the Bryn Glas tunnels, allowing that proper M4 bypass, which has long been needed, unblocking the. We will provide the Vicks inhaler, Mr. Speaker, to the nostrils of the Welsh dragon and get Wales moving.
Are you
you trying to put the fire out with the dragon? In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes.
Of the disease. We put in place one of the largest and most comprehensive economic responses in the world. Our £160 billion plan protects people's jobs, incomes, and businesses. We supported more than 11 million people and jobs through the job retention and self-employment schemes, alongside billions of pounds for the most vulnerable. We supported over 1 million businesses to protect jobs through tax cuts, tax deferrals, direct cash grants, and over 1 million government-backed loans. And we supported public services with new funding for the NHS, schools, public transport, and local authorities. In total, we have now provided £49 billion to support public services since this crisis began. Analysis I'm publishing today shows our interventions significantly protected people's incomes, with the least well-off in society supported the most. And this crisis has highlighted the special bond which holds our country together. Millions of people in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have been protected by the UK government's economic interventions. And they will be supported by today's plan for jobs. No nationalist can ignore the undeniable truth. This help has only been possible because we are a united kingdom. Mr. Speaker, 4 months on, as we carefully reopen our economy, we are entering the second phase of our economic response. Despite the extraordinary support we've already provided, we face profound economic challenges. World economic activity has slowed, with the IMF expecting the deepest global recession since records began. Household consumption, the biggest component of our economy, has fallen steeply. Businesses have stopped trading and stopped hiring. Taken together, in just 2 months, our economy contracted by 25%, the same amount it grew in the previous 18 years. And the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility and Bank of England are both projecting significant job losses, the most urgent challenge we now face. I want every person in this House and in the country to know that I will never accept unemployment as an unavoidable outcome. We haven't done everything we have so far, just to step back now and say, job done. In truth, the job has only just begun. Mr. Speaker, if the first phase of our economic response was about protection, and the second phase, the phase we're addressing today, is about jobs, there will come a third phase, where we will rebuild. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has set out our vision to level up, unite the country, spread opportunity, and repair and heal the wounds exposed through this crisis. I can tell the House we will produce a budget and spending review in the autumn. And we will deal too with the challenges facing our public finances. Over the medium term, we must and we will put our public finances back on a sustainable footing. In other words, our plan for jobs will not be the last action. It is merely the next in our fight to recover and rebuild after coronavirus. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the detail of our plan for jobs. Central to our economic response has been the Jobs Retention Scheme. Furlough has been a lifeline for millions, supporting people and businesses to protect jobs. But it cannot and should not go on forever. I know that when furlough ends, it will be a difficult moment. I'm also sure that if I say the scheme must end in October, critics will say it should end in November. If I say it should end in November, critics will just say December. But the truth is, calling for endless extensions to the furlough is just as irresponsible as it would have been back in June to end the scheme overnight. We have to be honest. Leaving the furlough scheme open forever gives people false hope that it will always be possible to return to the jobs they had before. And the longer people are on furlough, the more likely it is their skills could fade and they will find it harder to get new opportunities. It is in no one's long-term interest for the scheme to continue forever, least of all those trapped in a job that can only exist because of a government subsidy. So the furlough will wind down flexibly and gradually, supporting businesses and people through to October. But while we can't protect every job, one of the most important things we can do to prevent unemployment is to get as many people as possible from furlough back to their jobs. So today, we're introducing a new policy to reward and incentivise employers who successfully bring furloughed staff back, a new jobs retention bonus. If you're an employer and you bring someone back who was furloughed and you continuously employ them through to January, we will pay you a £1,000 bonus per employee. It is vital that people aren't returning just for the sake of it. They need to be doing decent work. So for businesses to get this bonus, the employee must be paid at least £520 on average in each month from November to January, the equivalent of the lower earnings limit in national insurance. The House should understand the significance of this policy. We will pay the bonus for all furloughed employees. So if employers bring back all 9 million people who have been furloughed, this would be a £9 billion policy to retain people in work. Our message to business is clear. If you stand by your workers, we will stand by you. Mr. Speaker, the furlough was the right policy to support people through the first phase of this crisis. But now, in this new phase, we need to evolve our approach. Today, I want to set out for the House a new three-point plan for jobs. We need to first support people to find jobs. Second, create jobs. And third, protect jobs. Mr. Speaker, let me start with supporting jobs, and in particular, the help we want to provide for those who will be hardest hit by this crisis, younger people. Over 700,000 people are leaving education this year. Many more are just starting out in their careers. Coronavirus has hit them hard. Under 25s are 2.5 times as likely to work in a sector that has been closed. We cannot lose this generation, so today I am announcing the Kickstart scheme. A new programme to give hundreds of thousands of young people in every region and nation of Britain the best possible chance of getting on and getting a job. The Kickstart scheme will directly pay employers to create new jobs for any 16 to 24-year-old at risk of long-term unemployment. These will be new jobs, with the funding conditional on the firm proving these jobs are additional. These will be decent jobs, with a minimum of 25 hours per week paid at least the national minimum wage, and they will be good quality jobs, with employers providing Kickstarters with training and support to find a permanent job. If employers meet these conditions, we will pay young people's wages for 6 months plus an amount to cover overheads. That means for a 24-year-old, the grant will be around £6,500. Employers can apply to be part of the scheme from next month, with the first Kickstarters in their new jobs this autumn. And I urge every employer, big or small, national or local, to hire as many Kickstarters as possible. Today, I'm making available an initial £2 billion, enough to fund hundreds of thousands of jobs. And I commit today there will be no cap on the number of places available. We can do more for young people. Traineeships are a proven scheme to get young people ready for work. We know they work, so for the first time ever, we will pay employers £1,000 to take on new trainees, with triple the number of places. To support 18 to 19-year-olds leaving school or college to find work in high-demand sectors like engineering, construction and social care, we'll provide £100 million to create more places on level 2 and 3 courses. And the evidence says careers advice works, so we will fund it, with enough new careers advisors to support over 250,000 more people. We will also expand our universal skills offer. Sector-based work academies provide training, work placements, and a guaranteed job interview in high-demand sectors. The evidence shows they work, so we will expand them, tripling the number of places. And we know apprenticeships work too. 91% of apprentices stay in work or do further training afterwards. So, for the next 6 months, we're going to pay employers to create new apprenticeships. We will pay businesses to hire young apprentices with a new payment of £2,000 per apprentice. And we will introduce a brand new bonus for businesses to hire apprentices aged 25 and over with a payment of £1,500. And let me thank my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, for his support and commitment in developing these measures. Mr. Speaker, we know the longer someone is out of work, the harder it is to return. Millions of people are moving onto universal credit. They need urgent support to get back to work. So, we are doubling the number of work coaches in job centres, increasing the Flexible Support Fund, extending the Rapid Response Service, expanding the Work and Health Programme, and developing a new scheme to support the long-term unemployed. The academic and economic evidence tells us these are among the most effective things we can do. So I'm investing an extra £1 billion in DWP to support millions of people back to work. And I'm grateful for everything my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, and her incredible team have done. £1 billion of support for the unemployed, more money for skills, traineeships and apprenticeships, and a new, good quality job for hundreds of thousands of new Kickstarters. The first part of our plan for jobs. Mr. Speaker, the second part of our plan is to support job creation. That begins with historic investment in infrastructure, creating jobs in every region and nation of the UK. At budget, I announced £88 billion of capital funding this year, and last week, the Prime Minister announced our plans to accelerate £5 billion of additional investment projects. We are doubling down on our ambition to level up, with better roads, better schools, better hospitals, better high streets, creating jobs in all 4 corners of our country. Mr. Speaker, as well as investing in infrastructure, we want to create green jobs. This is going to be a green recovery with concern for our environment at its heart. As part of that, I'm announcing today a new £2 billion Green Homes Grant. From September, homeowners and landlords will be able to apply for vouchers to make their homes more energy efficient and create local jobs. The grants will cover at least 2/3 of the cost, up to £5,000 per household. And for low-income households, we'll go even further, with vouchers covering the full cost, up to £10,000. On top of the £2 billion voucher scheme, I'm releasing £1 billion of funding to improve the energy efficiency of public sector buildings, alongside a £50 million fund to pilot the right approach to decarbonise social housing. Taken together, we expect these measures to make over 650,000 homes more energy efficient, save households up to £300 a year on their bills, cut carbon by more than 0.5 megatonne per year, equivalent to taking 270,000 cars off the road, and most importantly right now, support around 140,000 green jobs. A £3 billion green jobs plan to save money, cut carbon and create jobs. Mr. Speaker, one of the most important sectors for job creation is housing. The construction sector adds £39 billion a year to the UK economy. House building alone supports nearly 750,000 jobs, with millions more relying on the availability of housing to find work. But property transactions fell by 50% in May. House prices have fallen for the first time in 8 years, and uncertainty abounds in the market, a market we need to be thriving. We need people feeling confident to buy, sell, renovate, move and improve. That will drive growth. That will create jobs. So, to catalyse the housing market and boost confidence, I have decided today to cut stamp duty. Right now, there is no stamp duty on transactions below £125,000. Today, I am increasing the threshold to £500,000. This will be a temporary cut running until the 31st of March next year. And, as is always the case, these changes to stamp duty will take effect immediately. The average stamp duty bill will fall by £4,500. And nearly 9 out of 10 people buying a main home this year will pay no stamp duty at all. Stamp duty cuts, a £5,000 Green Homes grant, and tens of billions of pounds of new capital projects. We are creating jobs, the second part of our plan for jobs. Mr. Speaker, the final part of our plan will protect jobs that already exist by helping some of our highest employing but hardest hit sectors, hospitality and tourism. Our economy relies on consumption, especially social consumption. The pubs, cafes, restaurants, hotels and B&Bs that bring life to our villages, towns and cities. Taken together, these sectors employ over 2 million people, disproportionately younger, women and people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And many rural and coastal communities rely on these industries. 80% of hospitality firms temporarily stopped trading in April, and 1.4 million workers have been furloughed, the highest proportions of any sector. So the best jobs programme we can do is to restart these sectors and get our pubs, restaurants, cafes and B&Bs bustling again. I know people are cautious about going out, but we wouldn't have lifted the restrictions if we didn't think we could do so safely. And I've seen in the last few weeks how hard businesses are working to make their premises safe. And if we follow the guidance and respect what they ask us to do, we can all enjoy summer safely. In turn, we need to give these businesses the confidence to know that if they open up, invest in making their premises safe and protect jobs, demand will be there, and be there quickly. So today I'm announcing 2 new measures to get these sectors moving and protect jobs. First, at the moment, VAT on hospitality and tourism is charged at 20%. So I've decided for the next 6 months to cut VAT on food, accommodation and attractions. Eat-in or hot takeaway food from restaurants, cafes and pubs, accommodation in hotels, B&Bs, campsites and caravan sites, attractions like cinemas, theme parks and zoos. All these and more will see VAT reduced from next Wednesday until January the 12th from 20% to 5%. This is a £4 billion catalyst for the hospitality and tourism sectors. benefiting over 150,000 businesses and consumers everywhere, all helping to protect 2.4 million jobs. But, Mr. Speaker, we will go further. The final measure I'm announcing today has never been tried in the UK before. This moment is unique. We need to be creative. So, to get customers back into restaurants, cafes and pubs and protect the 1.8 million people who work in them, I can announce today that for the month of August, we will give everyone in the country an Eat Out to Help Out discount. Meals eaten at any participating business, Monday to Wednesday, will be 50% off up to a maximum discount of £10 per head for everyone, including children. Businesses will need to register and can do so through a simple website open next Monday. Each week in August, businesses can then claim the money back with the funds in their bank account within 5 working days. 1.8 million people work in this industry. They need our support. And with this measure, we can all eat out to help out. A VAT cut to 5% and a first-of-its-kind government-backed discount for all. That's the third part of our plan for jobs. So, Mr. Speaker, £1,000 jobs retention bonus. New, high-quality jobs for hundreds of thousands of young Kickstarters. £1 billion to double the number of work coaches and support the unemployed. More apprenticeships, more traineeships, more skills funding. Billions of pounds for new job creation projects across the country. A £3 billion plan to support 140,000 green jobs. And in this vital period, as we get going again, VAT cut, stamp duty cut, meals out cut. Mr. Speaker, all part of our plan for jobs worth up to £30 billion. Mr. Speaker, governments, much less people, rarely get to choose the moments that define them. What choice there is comes in how we respond. For me, this has never just been a question of economics, but of values. I believe in the nobility of work. I believe in the inspiring power of opportunity. I believe in the British people's fortitude and endurance. And it is that value, endurance, more than any other, we need to embody now. A patience to live with the uncertainty of the moment, to find that new balance between safety and normality. We will not be defined by this crisis, but by our response to it. It is an unambiguous choice to make this moment meaningful for our country in a way that transcends the frustration and loss of recent months. It is a plan to turn our national recovery into millions of stories of personal renewal. Mr. Speaker, it is our plan for jobs, and I commend it to this House.
Order, order. Before I call the Shadow Chancellor, I inform honourable and right honourable members that at the end of questions on this statement, I will call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move a provisional collection of taxes resolution. Copies of the resolution are available in the vote office. I now call the Shadow Chancellor and Alicia Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, our country has been through a great deal over these past few months. Hundreds of thousands have wrestled with this terrible disease. For many months, people have had to go without being able to embrace their loved ones, even to say goodbye. Tens of thousands have died. Our NHS, social care and other workers have made extraordinary sacrifices. We owe them so much. The government has had to take big decisions too. We acknowledge that. But today, Mr. Speaker, should have been the day when our government chose to build a bridge between what has been done so far and what needs to be done to get our economy moving again. It should have been the day when the millions of British people worried about their jobs and their future prospects had a load taken off their shoulders. It should have been the day when we got the UK economy firing again. Today, Britain should have had a back-to-work budget, but instead, we got this summer statement with many of the big decisions put off until later, as the benches opposite know full well. Now, Labour is a constructive opposition during this time of crisis. We won't criticise for criticism's sake, but when the government falls short, we will speak up. And the blunt truth is, we have one of the highest death rates in the world and among the deepest economic damage in the industrialised world from coronavirus. So the very first thing the Chancellor must do is prevent additional economic damage due to the slow public health response of his government. As we've seen throughout this crisis, the failure to match soaring rhetoric with meaningful action has consequences for people across our country. Despite all its talk, the government has failed to create a fully functioning test, track and isolate system. This has damaged public confidence and, in turn, harmed consumer demand. Despite all its talk, the government has failed to produce a clear system for local lockdowns. The lack of timely information sharing has led, as we all know, to the imposition of an additional wide-scale lockdown in Leicester. The government's contracts with outsourcing firms amount to almost £3 billion, but we still haven't got test, track and isolate working properly in the UK, like it is in many other countries, and government still hasn't got a grip on the low value and limited scope of sick pay, risking people's ability to self-isolate. Fear is corrosive. Fear is hurting our economy. Government has got to get this right. Now, of course, we welcome the government's announcement today of targeted VAT cuts on hospitality and tourism and of vouchers to be used in restaurants. Local businesses desperately need that support, and so many low and middle income people in particular really need help right now. That's why we've repeatedly called for social security to better meet their needs and prevent people risking losing their homes. If delivered properly, these measures should help. But the Chancellor himself said, when interviewed on the Andrew Marr show, that the best the government can do to boost demand is to give consumers and workers the confidence and psychological security that they can go out to work, to shop and to socialise in safety. So please, Chancellor, work with your colleagues so our public health response catches up with that operating in other countries. And Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said, what have I been doing about that? My party has been repeatedly suggesting solutions to the public health problems facing our country, and we need to adopt them in the UK before this crisis becomes even more severe. Now, government must act not just to deal with unemployment as a symptom, but also with its cause. Research reported this week in The Telegraph indicates that British workers have already been the biggest casualty in the global jobs cut. It showed that while jobs markets in many other countries have already fully recovered, in Britain it could take comparatively much longer for vacancy levels to return to normal. The levels of unemployment this country saw in the past were not just an economic waste. They ruined lives. We're seeing the same impacts again, the same devastated high streets and communities robbed of their pride and purpose. Now, when it comes to the re-employment bonus announced by the Chancellor, of course, this is necessary, not least because his government refused to put conditions on the use of those funds related to employment. But I would ask him, first of all, how can he ensure that that money will not just go to those employers who were already planning to bring people back into work? And secondly, what will he do? What will he do for those firms that lack the cash flow to be able to operate, even with that bonus? And related to this, the Chancellor still needs to abandon his one-size-fits-all approach to withdrawing the job retention and self-employed schemes. No one is saying those schemes should stay as they are indefinitely. We have never said that on this side of the House. But we have said that the money spent on the job retention scheme must not serve merely to postpone unemployment. The scheme must live up to its name, supporting employment in industries that are viable in the long term. And we need a strategy for the scheme to become more flexible so it can support those businesses forced to close again because of additional localised lockdowns. There's still time to avoid additional floods of redundancy notices. It's the government's duty to help Britain through this and stop employment at mass levels again. We need action to ensure the support needed for key sectors of our economy, for our SMEs and our manufacturers. And while, of course, we welcome the long overdue arts and culture package, we still haven't heard the government's plans for other sectors. Many of us expected to hear them today, but we haven't. The Operation Birch process has been slow, tortuous and opaque. Large parts of industrial Britain need help to get through this, to keep their employees in jobs and keep their suppliers in jobs. Meanwhile, it appears there will be no solutions for SMEs who can't take on additional debt until the autumn. This risks many SMEs going to the wall. Until now, the Chancellor has described a targeted sectoral approach as the Treasury picking winners. But the necessary public health measures have created losers. As the Chancellor himself said just now, the government required many businesses to shut down to prevent the spread of this disease. Supporting businesses that are viable in the long run but currently starved of cash flow is not a matter of picking winners. It's about protecting our country's economic capacity for the future. Failure to do so, to make the job retention and self-employed schemes more targeted and focused and to support viable businesses is driving up unemployment in this country. The claimant count is on course to top 3 million people in June, the highest number since the previous record in 1986. This is the Chancellor's record and one which cannot and must not be worsened. Now, where unemployment arises as a symptom of economic damage, more must be done to help. Now, Labour repeatedly called for government to match the ambitions of Labour's Future Jobs Fund and Welsh Labour's Jobs Growth Wales programme. And finally, government has come forward with a scheme apparently modelled on them, the Kickstart scheme. The Conservatives, of course, cancelled the Future Jobs Fund. It's taken them almost 10 years to catch up, and as with their belated adoption of our call for jobs, 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 perhaps this gives a new meaning to the phrase Project Speed. But we need to make sure now that that Kickstart scheme provides genuinely additional opportunities for young unemployed people. And government must also recognise the specific challenges faced by older job seekers, many of whom are becoming unemployed for the first time, and those based in especially hard-hit places. Reimposing sanctions now is punitive and counterproductive when job seekers need support. Now, we must be ambitious for the future of our country's economy. Our ambition should not just be to build our way out of this, but to do so in a greener and cleaner way. For this, we need more than the reheated announcements by the Prime Minister last week. Of course, the investment announced was welcome, not least because much of it was already committed to by the government. And core elements are missing. 50 million to support retrofitting in social homes, for example, is just a seventh of what the Conservatives said they would be spending every year. And the muddled confusions over stamp duty over the last 48 hours reflect a broader lack of strategy when it comes to house building, particularly for genuinely affordable and social homes. Overall, the UK's green investment package barely touches the sides of other countries' commitments. Even with what was announced today, it only equates to only just over the value of Germany's investment in one green technology alone, hydrogen. The Committee on Climate Change indicated how far behind the UK is in the race to decarbonise. Failure to heed its recommendations isn't only damaging to our planet, it also cuts us out of leading the development of the key technologies of the future. And the Conservatives, of course, are still refusing to impose conditions on investment to ensure that it contributes to the goal of net zero, that it supports local jobs, uses local firms, leads to sustainable, skilled employment in local areas and prevents the use of tax havens and other forms of asset stripping. Finally, if the Chancellor really wants to build back better, he must prevent a rerun of the past. From 2010 onwards, we've seen how families' resilience has been eroded. We entered this crisis with a quarter of families lacking even £100 in savings. In a typical classroom of 39 children are growing up in poverty, and our economy is the most regionally unequal in Europe. Our local authorities continue to be cut to the bone, with many standing on the brink of bankruptcy as we speak. And rather than the promise that our NHS and social care services would get whatever they needed this winter to weather a potential second wave, those words were conspicuously absent from the Chancellor's speech just now. Now, politicians in this House have gone out on our doorsteps to clap key workers while the lowest paid have struggled to keep a roof over their heads. We must have a new settlement for the future, an end to poverty pay for our social care workers and those who clean our hospitals and deliver our groceries, a recognition of the value of the work of those who've been taken for granted for far too long. Now, there were some initial press reports that the government was due to announce generalised tax increases or cuts to services this autumn, contradicted by the Prime Minister, who rejected whatever had apparently been briefed out by the Treasury. It's happened quite a few times. Well, I say to the government, if it does increase taxes during the recovery and cuts back on the public services we all rely on, this will damage demand and inhibit our recovery. Labour is not calling for tax rises. We are calling for growth. Now, the Tory manifesto committed to no rises in income tax, national insurance or VAT, and therefore it is for the Conservatives to set out how any additional spending will be paid for. It's the Chancellor's job to make sure the economy bounces back from this crisis so there's money in the coffers to protect the public finances. Now, last week, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor's colleague, the Prime Minister, tried to claim the mantle of FDR, as we all know. Maybe now we know why he went for Roosevelt, because this week the Prime Minister blamed carers for the failings in the system that his government had underfunded for the past decades. Now we know why he went for Roosevelt, because the last thing his government would have wanted was the sign on Harry Truman's desk, the successor to Roosevelt. That sign said, "The buck stops here." If this government had a sign, it would probably say, "The buck stops anywhere but here." But it can't escape its responsibilities. To govern is to choose to finally sort out Test Track and Isolate, to prevent unnecessary additional unemployment and to build the green jobs of the future. This is a moment when our country needs its government to help Britain through.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member opposite for that contribution. Throughout this crisis, she and I have spoken, and where possible, I have tried to find common ground for our measures with as broad a coalition as possible, including with members of the opposition. I do feel it is necessary, however, to reiterate just a few points. The honourable lady talked about vulnerable people. Well, as I said, the analysis published today shows that our interventions have helped the poorest in our society the most. Those are the values of this Conservative government. We will make sure no one is left behind during this time of national crisis, and we will ensure that those who are most vulnerable get the support and protection they deserve. She also talked about jobs and the difference in different countries' reactions to the labour market. She is right. Our economy is more reliant on consumption than other economies. It is also more reliant on social consumption than other economies. That is why the acute difficulty of social distancing and the shutdowns have affected our economy more than others. And that is why, to help protect those 2 million jobs in the 150,000 business in those sectors, people who are on average lower paid, women, BME communities, rural and coastal communities, that is why we have put in place what I believe to be bold and decisive measures to help protect employment in those sectors. She talked about conditionality on funds that we've provided. And here, Mr. Speaker, she has to choose. It can't be that you can develop significant interventions to provide liquidity and cash support to businesses at scale and at speed, whilst at the same time having an incredibly targeted approach, imposing conditions on individual businesses. You have to choose one or the other. We chose the former. The speed of what was happening to our economy, the scale that it was happening, demanded an approach that required us to take a broad-brushed approach, and that was the way we could get help to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible.
Absolutely right.
But where individual businesses come to the taxpayer and require bespoke support, then it is right that we impose conditions on those businesses. And I have been very clear that that's what I would do, and indeed, that is what we have done. Without going into the details, as that would be inappropriate, such interventions will come with conditions. Conditions around executive pay, protecting employment, climate change obligations, how supply chain and small businesses are treated, and obligations around tax. Those are all commitments and conditions that the taxpayer would expect us to do in those situations, and that is what we have done in the one instance where the support has been provided thus far, and is what we will do for any future support. She talked about a green recovery. This government is proud of its record on our environment. She talks about Germany. She talks about other countries. Mr. Speaker, when I stood here in March, we outlined one of the most ambitious and far-reaching investment programs in our environment and in tackling net zero from any government this country has seen. Carbon capture and storage, the Nature for Climate Fund, investing to further the support for electric vehicles, new charging stations, tackling air quality, taxes on polluters. Those are all measures we have already taken. I'm glad other countries are catching up. We have decarbonised faster than almost every other European country. It is a record on this side of the House we are proud of. The measures we've announced today represent some of the most far-reaching measures any country has taken to tackle energy efficiency. They will provide thousands of pounds of grants for homeowners up and down the country to create local jobs and ensure that we can reduce carbon emissions from our housing stock, which today account for almost a fifth of all our emissions. This is something that the Committee on Climate Change has said we must address. In our manifesto, we committed to addressing it. And rather than waiting to get started, rather than the 5-year plan outlined in our manifesto, we are getting on with it today. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady spoke about furlough. And here again, I make no apology for the fact that we must and should wind down this scheme. I'm glad that today the OECD have made clear that they also believe wage support schemes must be carefully wound down in order to get people back to work, to protect jobs and return to growth. And I see the Honourable Lady opposite has moved around on this issue. She herself said at the end of May that a targeted approach would, in her words, pose challenges and force hard choices. I haven't heard from the Honourable Lady how she would solve those challenges and hard choices, but we remain committed to protecting people in their jobs. We understand that those businesses who have had to furlough employees have been through a difficult time, which is why today we outlined a £9 billion policy, the job retention bonus, to support workers and to support businesses who bring those furloughed workers back. And lastly, she talked about the Future Jobs Fund. Mr. Speaker, I am guided by the evidence. Parts of that scheme did work well, and I am not dogmatic. I will do what works. But there are major differences to the Kickstarter scheme. The Kickstarter scheme will be bigger. It will be helping more young people. It will be broader, involving the private sector, and it will be better value for the taxpayer, ensuring less money is spent on administration fees and more money in the pockets of young people working. Mr. Speaker, we have questions from the member opposite. We have opinions from the member opposite. Last week, we even had tests from the member opposite. The one thing we don't have from the member opposite is a plan. I closed my statement by saying this government was making an unambiguous choice to make this moment meaningful for our country. Now, the party opposite must choose. Do they believe, as we do, that Britain has the energy and power to bounce back? Do they have confidence, as we do, in our incredible public services? Do they believe, as we do, in the enterprising spirit of British business? If they do, then they should do what is right and back our plan for jobs.
Come to the Chair of the Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend's plan for jobs is characteristically thoughtful, creative and bold, and I very firmly welcome it. He has rightly said, Mr. Speaker, that we look to businesses to grow the jobs of the future. And yet what we do know is there will be many hundreds of thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises who will emerge through this crisis saddled with significant amounts of corporate debt. And we will look to them at that moment to be investing in jobs and growth rather than being concerned about deleveraging and shoring up their balance sheets. So could I ask my right honourable friend whether he has given this particular issue specific thought, and if he has, what solutions he might have to bring to this House?
I very much welcome my honourable friend's support and thank him for that, and also the advice that he has provided to me over the past few weeks and months. He's right to highlight on the issue of leverage. What I would say is the good thing coming into this crisis, levels of corporate indebtedness in the UK were the lowest they've been in around a decade and ranked very favourably compared to most OECD countries. But he is right that we want to make sure that that is not a drag on our recovery. I am currently looking at proposals from a range of people, including my honourable friend, the member for Hitchin and Harpenden and City UK and others, and I look forward to discussing those with him.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thewlis.
Mr. Speaker, I would usually start with thanking the Chancellor for advance sight of his statement, but today I think I might ask for a fresh printer cartridge for the heavily redacted copy, which was effectively useless, sent round to spokespeople ahead of his statement. Mr. Speaker, countries around the world have supported their people in this crisis, and the only UK exceptionalism is being amongst the countries where most people have died. The Chancellor has spent big over the past few months and comes with more proposals today. We support measures like the job support schemes and encourage the Chancellor to be more ambitious and think to the future in his stimulus plans. We want a comprehensive plan to support the economy, protect jobs and incomes and build a greener, fairer society. We've looked to the ambitious stimulus packages of our European neighbours and urged the Chancellor to look at a package of investment no less than £80 billion of new money, equating to approximately 4% of UK GDP, the equivalent of investment being made by Germany. This would allow for the level of investment needed to secure jobs not just now, but for the future, because we know that Brexit is coming over the horizon. The Scottish Parliament currently has a very restricted ability to borrow under a fiscal framework which is not designed with COVID-19 in mind. Kate Forbes, Rebecca Evans and Conor Murphy, the finance ministers of all three devolved institutions, have come together to seek urgent devolution of the financial powers in these unprecedented times and to be able to have the flexibility to switch capital to revenue spending. The Scottish Parliament must have the full range of powers to deliver a tailored response and secure a strong recovery for Scotland. Otherwise, necessary spending in coronavirus will mean cuts elsewhere and fixed budgets. And will he be clear on what these proposals today mean for the block grant adjustment? Neither have said today that the GDP of the UK could be cut by 2.5% if the Chancellor goes ahead and withdraws the job support schemes prematurely. Ros Foyer, the General Secretary of the Scottish TUC, has called for continuation of the scheme, noting that hospitality, tourism, aviation and oil and gas are in particular need of extended support. And not a word, Mr. Speaker, about oil and gas in the Chancellor's statement. Those shielding and with caring responsibilities will also need ongoing support. And coronavirus is not going away. There's a real risk that with future outbreaks such as happened in Leicester, that support will not be there when it is needed. And I see what he says about encouraging people back to work and a bonus for employers who do. But for many people, it will not be safe to go back to work. And at the start of this crisis, my inbox was full of people worried about the safety of their workplaces. And people should not be forced to go back if it is not safe for them to do so. The recent Treasury Select Committee reports and work by Excluded UK highlight the substantial gaps in the coronavirus job retention scheme and the self-employment income support schemes, but with between 1 and 3 million people left with no support whatsoever. People are furious, Mr. Speaker, at the suggestion by the Chancellor yesterday that they've had support. They asked me to assure him again today that they have not. The SNP believe the Chancellor must fill these gaps and extend the furlough and cease schemes for as long as each of the 4 nations require it, so that no one is left behind. A report by the Social Mobility Commission last week warned that UK child poverty is projected to increase to 5.2 million by 2022, with COVID-19 adding to this problem. Now is the time, Mr Speaker, to strengthen measures to reverse rising child poverty, including a £20 per week increase in the child element of universal credit and child tax credits. This will help families put food on the table and clothes on children's back at a time when many are struggling. Mr Speaker, these parents are not eating out. Some of these parents are barely eating at all.
Hear, hear.
The Tories must also scrap the callous two-child cap, re-establish child poverty targets, introduce a real living wage for all ages and roll out an emergency basic payment plan to protect families. We want to see investment too in a national debt plan to support businesses, families and individuals who have been struggling. And while I'm glad to see that he wants to re-employ job centre staff, will he reopen the many job centres he closed in Glasgow?
Exactly.
We support a temporary reduction in VAT to VAT, and we're glad to see the Chancellor coming forward with plans. We've been calling for this since March. He mentioned cinemas within this. Will live events also see a VAT reduction in their ticket sales? Because gigs and theatre would benefit hugely from being able to do that and offer that. All of this sits inside a £2 cut that we're calling for to employers' national insurance contributions to protect jobs and reduce the cost of hiring staff. Mr Speaker, our young, bright, talented people are worth so much more than 25 hours a week on a minimum wage. A minimum wage rather than a real living wage with age discrimination baked in. For many of those young people, it won't be so much a kick-start as a kick in the teeth to be told to go to work for so little money. Those aged between 16 and 24 have bills to pay too, and they deserve fair pay for their work. I note that he quoted the higher band, the 24-year-old band, not the £6.45 an hour for younger people, or the £4.55 that 16 and 17-year-olds get. An absolute pittance, Mr Speaker, and there should be a real living wage for all. Can he confirm whether, if, as has been trailed, that this plan is tied to universal credit, will sanctions be applied to those who don't take it up? What will happen to those shielding or with caring responsibilities? What will happen to those not currently on universal credit? Will it be open to them? And what commitment has he made on employers not to fire older, more expensive staff in favour of people on this scheme? And what will happen after 6 months? And Mr Speaker, what is open to older people to help them continue in employment? Many young people are already employed in sectors where right now jobs are disappearing. Many are already on furlough. Wouldn't it be less disruptive to maintain that link with employers rather than make them start over? On the vouchers scheme that he proposes on green plans, this, Mr Speaker, is relatively speaking tinkering. If you look at the comprehensive work that KfW in Germany has done to change the whole conversation around green investment. Mr Speaker, we want to put significant and sustained investment in the future in the heart of these plans, and to ensure that Scotland has the widest possible range of powers to tackle COVID-19. Only by doing this, Mr Speaker, can we avoid the worst of this storm and protect both businesses and the health and well-being of our people.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions. Perhaps I can just run through them as quickly as I can. She asked about the block grant adjustment. The OBR will do final costings for these policies in the coming week, and once those costings have been done, the block grant would be adjusted as quickly as is possible, but it should be done based on OBR costings, as is normal for these matters. She asked about Barnet. I'm pleased to tell the House that the sum total of Barnet funding for Scotland as a result of all the interventions through this crisis now totals £4.6 billion. Which is going to support similar measures in Scotland as we're providing elsewhere. She asked about the inclusion of different businesses in the VAT cut for attractions. I can refer her to Principal VAT Directive Annex 3, Paragraph 7, where the existing legislation is drawn. The guidance will be published tomorrow for SIs to be laid next week and to come into force on Wednesday, but that paragraph has the full range covered in our existing legislation. In terms of investment, it is right. It is absolutely important that we do invest in our future. It's something that matters very keenly, both to me but indeed also to the Prime Minister, and which is why in the budget we delivered on the Prime Minister's ambitions to level up in every part of this country with investment plans that tripled the amount of investment in our country from the last 4 decades. It is a significant commitment of our level of ambition and support for every part of this United Kingdom, building the prosperity for the future by having an investment revolution, and she can be reassured we remain absolutely committed to that goal. She asked also about support for those who are older. What I can say to her is for the, not quite the first time, but the only other time we did it was very time-limited time as well, we are introducing a payment to businesses to take on apprentices over the age of 25, £1,500 per apprentice taken on. That is for the simple reason that whilst most people think of apprentices as young people, 44% or so of new apprentice starts are actually over the age of 25, and it's important that we provide that financial incentive at this time of economic distress to try and create as many new apprenticeships as possible, including for those who are older, who will also benefit, of course, from all our other universal skills interventions that my right honourable friend, the Pension Secretary and Education Secretary, will take forward. More broadly, I would close, Mr. Speaker, by saying the measures I announced today, the jobs retention bonus for furloughed employees, the Kickstart scheme, the VAT cut and the Eat Out to Help Out discount, all incredibly significant interventions. All of them benefit the entire United Kingdom. And it is important to note, as I've heard from the Honourable Lady and other members of her party, how important tourism is to the Scottish economy. It's something my Scottish colleagues have made very clear to me. Rural communities, especially coastal communities, they disproportionately play an important part in the Scottish economy. These measures, Eat Out to Help Out and the VAT reduction for these economies, will be absolutely vital in driving the growth of Scotland going forward. And again, a reminder to everyone, we are stronger together, one United Kingdom.
Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the positive approach the Chancellor and the Government are taking? I think that if we were to ask, many MPs who won't be able to ask questions now would want to share with me the view that we should be green, red and blue. Green, having economically and environmentally sustainable ways of getting the economy to come back. Red, to watch out for things we should not be doing. And blue, as a way of being colourblind and trying to make sure that whether in the coast or in the countryside or in the cities, people get the opportunities. I hope that the Chancellor will actually pay attention to what the Honourable Lady for the SNP said about the excluded. The new all-party group is very concerned about those who have not been caught up by some of the support schemes. They need help, and I hope the Chancellor will find some way of bringing them forward as well. If I can just use one example of the red, what not to do, I'm putting down an early day motion, a prayer, against a statutory instrument, 2020-632, which goes under the name of Town and Country Planning, Permitted Development, Miscellaneous Amendments, England, Coronavirus Regulations. That allows 2 stories to be built on blocks of flats between 1948 and 2018. I don't have a personal interest in this, by the way. And potentially, this will wreck the lives of leaseholders who want to get their freehold, put the price up so that people like Vincent Chengas can go stuffing his pockets again at the risk of the pockets of expensive leaseholders. And I ask my honourable friend to look at this and say, can there be a better housing advisor in number 10 and in Ministry of Housing to make sure they don't get things wrong again?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend's support, and I'm very happy to talk to him about the matter that he raised. But also, I do agree with him, and he is something he has championed for a long time. This must be a green recovery, and it will be a green recovery.
David.
Can I thank the Chancellor for the positive measures he has announced, but why was there absolutely nothing serious for the self-employed? And, Mr. Speaker, with unemployment rocketing perhaps up to 3 million, and with the climate emergency already hitting us, why is the Chancellor's ambition for a green recovery so small? Surely, Mr. Speaker, we need far more green jobs now and in the future. Why isn't it being as radical as European countries like Germany and France with a massive green fiscal stimulus for the technologies and industries of the future? And even his own home insulation plan, surely, Mr. Speaker, it should be 3 times as big, lasting 5 years to get the real investment in our homes to decarbonise and get the green jobs for our young people and for every community across our country.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member asks about the self-employed. He will know that our self-employment scheme is, without doubt, one of the most comprehensive and generous, if not the most comprehensive and generous, anywhere in the world. That is considerable support that's already been provided. Also, those in the construction centre, 40% of them are self-employed. Many of the people installing the new energy efficiency measures will be in that category and will benefit for that increased demand for their services, something I'm delighted will happen. And lastly, he talks about Germany, as do other members. It's important to remember that Germany's plan is a plan with unspecified dates stretching over 5 years, this €50 billion. We unveiled in March a £640 billion investment plan for the next 5 years.
Javed? Can I, Mr. Speaker, commend my right honourable friend's statement and the actions that he has taken to ensure that we get the strongest possible recovery as we can. And he's been absolutely right thus far to spend what it takes, something he set out very clearly back in March. But I know that he will be acutely aware that interest rates will not stay low forever, and eventually we will need to bring back our national debt under control in order to sustain a recovery and continue to create jobs and to keep taxes low. So can I encourage my right honourable friend in his autumn budget to set out new fiscal rules with an aim of getting our national debt down as a proportion of our national income by the end of this Parliament?
I thank my right honourable friend for his kind support and also his advice. And he is, of course, absolutely right. And I hope he was heartened by what he heard me say in the statement about the importance of returning in the medium term our public finances to a sustainable footing. We can and we will do exactly that. And he was right to highlight the sensitivity of our debt to interest rates, which was why he was right to introduce into our fiscal framework the notion of an interest service rule, which is something that I will look at keenly in the coming months.
Tommy Wilson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the announcements which the Chancellor has made today to undo some of the economic damage caused by the actions taken to deal with the health crisis? And can I also echo the point which he has made, that these measures benefit places like Northern Ireland only because we are part of the 5th biggest economy in the world and we have got the umbrella of the UK to protect us against these kind of economic crises. I'm sure that the hospitality industry will welcome the measures which he has announced today, albeit that they are quite time limited. I think the clothes shops might welcome it as well, because once we've eaten our way through a month's half-price meals, we might all be visiting them. But there's one sector which is important to Northern Ireland in terms of its export potential, high-value jobs, tourism importance and connectivity with the rest of the United Kingdom, and that's the aerospace and the aviation sectors. There hasn't been anything mentioned today about those sectors, and the Chancellor has said these are the first of his steps. I hope that we will in future see, and very quickly, see some actions taken to deal with those.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful for the honourable member's support. And perhaps alongside the Eat Out to Help Out, we can make progress on reopening our gyms. So at the same time, we can deal with that side of the equation. And he's absolutely right. Obviously, airlines and aviation are experiencing a very difficult period of time. I remain in close contact with the industry and indeed individual companies to understand what is happening. And if there are things that we can and should do, of course, we will.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many on the opposition benches would have us extend furlough indefinitely, which is simply extending false hope. Does my right honourable friend agree that bold demand-side measures like Eat Out to Help Out and the VAT cut are much better ways to protect jobs and to protect our much-loved businesses?
Yeah.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The OECD also agrees with her. We should not be peddling false hope to people. We should be providing for them a better future, and that is what our interventions today do.
Thank you. We're now going to Barry Sherman. Barry Sherman. Barry?
Can you hear me, Speaker?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, can I give a cautious welcome to the Chancellor's emphasis on young people, employment and training? And can I say to him, there are many of us across the House who have a lot of experience on schemes like this that have worked better, some worse. We'd be willing to work with him to make this a success. Can I say there is a disappointment that he hadn't accepted my challenge of a windfall profit tax, like the one Mrs Thatcher introduced, in order to pay for a massive green apprenticeship scheme. But lastly, on a very serious point, if we're going to train these young people, we've got to have the capacity to train them. Further education colleges are in deep trouble. They need help now. Private trainers, like some of them in my constituency, are struggling to maintain their existence. Will he look at that urgently? We need the trainers to train these young people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable member will be pleased to know I'm very happy to take advice on how best to design these schemes. I think he will hopefully take some comfort that I was just talking to Francis O'Grady from the TUC. I'm very open to hearing advice from unions who I know were also involved in helping to design previous schemes. With regard to green jobs, the measures today that we've announced will help protect 140,000 green jobs. I agree with him about the importance of training, which is why in the budget we announced £400 million, I believe, extra for further education colleges funding this year, and an ambitious plan to upgrade the entire FE estate over the coming years.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in North West Durham and across the country will welcome the massive cash boost for employers who both hire our young people and protect employees with our new job retention bonus. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that alongside the confidence and demand boost that his VAT cut and other measures delivered in this extra budget, that these measures on employment show that it is this Conservative government that is putting jobs at the heart of our recovery from the global coronavirus pandemic?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know he shares with me a passionate belief, as I said, in the nobility of work. And this plan today is about providing everyone in North West Durham and every other part of the country with the opportunity to secure good work.
Let's head to the northwest with Margaret Greenwood. Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week saw the first meeting of the APPG for the excluded, the estimated 3 million people who've missed out on government support and are facing real financial hardship. I note the Chancellor has avoided answering questions on this matter so far today. Now, can I explain to him the excluded includes people on zero-hour contracts, directors of small companies paying themselves through dividends, and many self-employed people. In my constituency, it's taxi drivers, joiners, beauticians, childminders, care workers, driving instructors, IT consultants, the list goes on. So will the Chancellor look again at providing support to the excluded so that they too can play their part in the recovery?
Mr. Speaker, I haven't avoided answering the question. I've answered it not just today, but on every other occasion I've been at this dispatch box. We've provided comprehensive support to many millions of people, especially the self-employed, more generous and comprehensive than any other country. I have acknowledged we haven't been able to help everyone in the exact way they would like, but because of the strengthening that we've put in place of our welfare system and our universal loan schemes, everyone has been able to access some form of support.
Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Friend for his characteristically timely and bold interventions. It will be welcomed by a lot of nervous households across the country. My constituents of Meriden are very environmentally focused and they will welcome the Green Homes Grant. Does my Right Honourable Friend agree it's not just about protecting the environment, but it's about creating jobs and it's about giving the greatest benefit to those households on the lowest incomes?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Those on the lowest incomes will receive grants of up to £10,000 to cover the full cost. But this is a policy that does all three things. It will create local employment in communities, which right now is what we want. It will save households money off their bills, up to £200 or £300 for typical cavity wall insulations, and it will also cut carbon. An average house installing these measures will save, I think, the equivalent carbon of a flight from London to New York. So this is a policy that does what we need right now. Cuts carbon, creates jobs and saves cash.
Mr. Speaker, to boost employment in Blaenau Gwent, we need to help more people get on the Ebervale train to Cardiff. But the line needs to be redoubled with improved signalling and bridging works. Now, a business plan is in the pipeline from the Welsh Government. So will the Chancellor commit to following through and please look at providing the investment for jobs that we need, in short, to do what is right for the people of the South Wales Valleys?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to look at the proposal from the Honourable Member, and I'm sure the Transport Secretary is fully abreast of it, and I'll pick it up with him as well.
Well, we come to Sir John Redwood.
Excellent focus on jobs and excellent measures. So will the government now review the taxes, subsidies, public procurement and regulations in a way that could be amended so that we grow more of our own food, land and process more of our own fish, generate more of our own power and supply more of the things our health service and MOD require, because it can be better made in Britain and better made with British jobs?
I thank my honourable friend for his support. He's absolutely right. Leaving the European Union provides us with a unique opportunity to re-examine all our procurement rules and many of our regulations, and I share with him a passion to ensure that as much as possible we can support our local economy for creating jobs, which has never been more vital than it is today.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I take the Chancellor back to page 14 of his statement in relation to the Department of Work and Pensions? He will know that DWP management have asked for 30,000 additional posts. So can you tell us, in relation to the doubling of work coaches, whether that is new posts or whether that is redeployment? And can you tell us a bit more about whether the job centre closure programme will be suspended as a result of his announcements today? And will he build a terms and conditions package, given that DWP have a high turnover of staff, that there will be a terms and conditions package that will be attractive?
Mr. Speaker, we are investing an extra £1 billion in DWP this year, very specifically, amongst other things, to double the number of work coaches from £13,500. I'm pleased to say work has already started, recruitment is already going on, and this will be a faster pace than I think this has ever been done, but certainly faster than what happened in 08 and 09.
Sir Bernard.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement? While I am adding my voice to those who are highlighting the plight of self-employed people or people who have been remunerating themselves through dividends and have not been able to benefit from the furlough scheme, as raised by my right honourable friend, the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee in a recent report, can I thank him wholeheartedly for what he's done for the hospitality sector, which really will help coastal communities such as those in Harwich and North Essex. It really is a big boost for jobs and employment.
Chancellor.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his support. He's absolutely right. We're approaching a summer unlike we've ever seen. It's important that we all enjoy summer safely. It will be different, but it's so vital for our coastal communities, those who are used to welcoming visitors from home and abroad, that they get to have a proper summer, and we collectively can do that by eating out to help out. But it's critical to remember at all times it's those 2 million people who work in these industries, vulnerable people, in areas that are not necessarily as resilient as others. They need our support, so let's get out there this summer.
Barry Gardner.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor has made some excellent announcements, none more so than to the hospitality sector. His May announcement to the sector delighted 9,000 hospitality businesses in my borough of Brent at the prospect of grants up to £25,000. That was the prospect. The reality was very different. His department released just £3.3 million to Brent, which would have given each of those businesses no more than £366. What can he say to those 9,000 disappointed businesses? And will he back up today's announcements with real cash this time?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member talked about real cash and business rates grants. We have deployed over £10 billion in cash to local authorities across this country, which has found its way to 800,000+ businesses, either £10,000 or £25,000 targeted at those businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. It's something that has been a lifeline for small shops, small businesses up and down this country.
18 withdrawn, so we go to Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased the Chancellor has spoken about the hospitality and retail sectors, but in my constituency of Luton South, many of those are reliant on passengers going through Luton Airport. Until there is targeted support for the aviation industry, those passengers, those employees will not be supported, many of whom are young and from BAME backgrounds in my constituency. So can I be assured that detailed equality impact assessments have been made on all aspects of the plan?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I've said before this is a matter of social justice. It is precisely because the people who work in the sectors most affected by what is happening are younger, are from BME communities, and are women, are on lower pay, often part-time. That is why we have taken very bold and decisive action to help those sectors, because ultimately what we're trying to do is help those 2 million people employed. And she's right, it's because of the equalities impact that the moment demands that kind of action.
Ben Bradley.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for the generous support he's laid out today, particularly welcome for hospitality businesses who've already been on my mobile phone texting me their support for those packages. We all know that our country has regional inequalities, and many disadvantaged communities in the East Midlands will be among the hardest hit by COVID-19, whilst historically we've been underfunded compared to other regions. So will he help us to rebuild and have a strong local voice in this recovery by backing an East Midlands authority to be an effective voice for our area, to get all pistons firing on the Midlands engine and rebalance things with our effective West Midlands Mayor Andy Streets, and make sure the work he is delivering in government can be delivered effectively in the East Midlands?
Chancellor.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I'm loath to get involved in an East-West Midlands spat, but I very much encourage him in his efforts, and he makes an important point about the importance of local leadership. As we think about our recovery, it will be local leaders, it will be town councils, parish councils, local authorities, LEPs, all driving forward our recovery one area at a time.
Heading to Scotland with Kenny McCaskill. Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As others have mentioned, and indeed the Chancellor has acknowledged, the least well-off have suffered disproportionately with the health effects of this virus, and they must not pay the price of the economic consequences. Will the Chancellor therefore ensure that the cost of these measures will not be borne by the poor and low-paid, instead will be met by those with wealth and assets, whether in land and property here or in tax havens abroad, as so many chums in the Cabinet seem to have?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, our record speaks for itself. This government has done more to tackle tax evasion, tax avoidance than any other government in history. We now collect hundreds of billions of pounds more than has ever been done. Indeed, many of those measures, as I seem to recall, were opposed by the party opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend on behalf of many constituents in the Mean Valley who have benefited from the measures he's brought in place during the coronavirus crisis and the ones that he's announced today. Will the generous new arts funding be available for those in the live events industry? And if not, might some further support for them be announced in the near future?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. The Culture Secretary, I believe, is working through the detail of how that money will be distributed, and if I could direct her to him on the precise question she has. What I would say, though, is that it's important that that funding is not just for our crown jewel assets, famous and important as they are. It's to benefit our local cultural institutions in all of our communities across the country.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having introduced the Future Jobs Fund and the wider Youth Job Guarantee as Work and Pensions Secretary in 2009 and been really appalled when they were cancelled a year later under the coalition, I do very much welcome the reintroduction of these measures now. You'll know that speedy delivery is crucial, and it has to be bigger because the crisis is bigger. We achieved it last time by involving local councils working with the local private sector and third sector to speedily deliver jobs. Will he do that again? And can he confirm, is this a job guarantee, a job or training guarantee for every young person as we had last time? And if so, from which month will the guarantee apply?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady does know this well, and I enjoyed reading and learning from some of the things that she did at the time. In terms of a guarantee, Mr. Speaker, what we have put in place is a comprehensive suite of interventions. She will know from the evidence, as she knows this area, that we want to encourage young people into work or some kind of work-based training. In the hierarchy of interventions, that should come first, but we do have a classroom-based offer. She would have heard me talk about increased funding for level 2 and 3 training for school leavers, especially if they cannot avail themselves of traineeship, sector-based work academies or other interventions. But more broadly on her point, I would be very happy to sit down with her and get her advice and thoughts on how we can make sure that the Kickstart scheme is as successful as it can be.
Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend on behalf of the 9,900 furloughed workers of Darlington whose prospects of redundancy have been reduced today, and on behalf of the 1,000 unemployed young people of Darlington whose prospects of a job have been improved today. Does he agree with me that his incredibly bold changes to stamp duty are now the key to unlocking our housing market?
Councillor.
Mr. Speaker, I know my honourable friend has been working very hard on behalf of his local businesses and his young people, and I'm glad that he welcomes the initiatives today. He's right about unlocking the housing market, which is why the intervention today will mean that almost 90% of people in this country buying a main home this year will pay no stamp duty until next March. It is a very strong catalyst for people to get moving, to get buying, selling, and importantly renovating. All of it will create local jobs in Darlington and beyond.
Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the emergency nature of this statement, could the Chancellor lay out exactly what kind of environmental impact assessment will be measured against each of these funding pots so that we can ensure value for money and look at the impact of each of these measures and also to avoid any corruption or fraud?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the Honourable Lady that all relevant impact assessments are conducted at the time that they are required by legislation. In terms of the environmental impact, I gave a flavour of it earlier. The sum total of the Green Homes Grant Scheme and Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund will mean about 0.5 megatonne of carbon will be saved every year. That's the equivalent of about 270,000 cars taken off the road and about 140,000 new jobs. So hopefully that is something that she will welcome.
Tim Lawton.
Mr. Speaker, representing a coastal constituency, can I really warmly welcome the hospitality industry measures, which are very practical, but can I suggest that it should be eat out to help out to work out, for which we need our gyms reopened again. Now, recognising this is mostly about business, and I really welcome the emphasis on young people as well, can I ask him not to forget the youngest people? Around 200,000 babies have been born during lockdown. We've seen a higher instance of perinatal mental illness, new parents unable to access extended family support and health visitors as well. What steps can he take to make sure that this cohort is helped to catch up as well?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that. I wholeheartedly agree with him about gyms, and hopefully, as the Prime Minister has indicated previously, he's keen to see progress made there as well. On the issue of early years and children, he knows this better than many others, other than perhaps one colleague sitting behind me. He's absolutely right. He will know the work we did on the Troubled Families programme, and I was grateful to him when I was local government minister for his advice and support on that. And I know the Early Years Working Group has put forward a range of suggestions that we can take forward into the spending review.
Paula Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The coronavirus pandemic has laid bare the deep and systematic inadequacies of the current social care system and revealed the true extent of the impact underfunding, structural issues and market instability have had on the system's ability to respond and protect older people at a time of crisis. And despite the Prime Minister seeking to flagrantly blame our incredible social care sector for excess deaths this week, when will the government get serious about caring for our most vulnerable and fund local authorities properly to bring social care services back in-house?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, in our manifesto, we committed to an extra £1 billion a year for social care, and that's what we have delivered this year and will continue to do so. During this crisis, we've provided £3.7 billion to local authorities and an additional £600 million for infection control in care homes. But as the Prime Minister has said, we remain committed to ensuring that local authorities and care homes get all the support that they need.
Let us head to Bexley Heath and drop in on Sir David Evanets.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement
and all the work he's done in the past months to preserve jobs and assist our businesses. Young people are at greater risk of unemployment at this time, and I welcome his plans to help 16 to 24-year-olds with his Kickstart scheme, traineeships and a better careers advice. Does he agree with me that these proposals will be good for them, good for our economy, and give real hope for the future with many more jobs?
Councillor?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his support. He's absolutely right. The research and the evidence lays bare the risk that young people face from scarring at this early stage in their careers. They're entering an appalling labour market, which is why it's critical we have made the interventions that we have today, and in particular the Kickstart scheme. But he is right. If it's about one word, it's about providing them with hope.
Cavan Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the beginning of this crisis, the Chancellor said that the government would do whatever it takes. Local government finance is in crisis, but we didn't have one single mention of it in his statement today. Durham County Council, for example, has spent £62 million on its COVID response. It's had £33.2 million from the government, leaving £28.8 million for the taxpayer locally to pick up. Can I ask the Chancellor when he's going to bring forward a comprehensive settlement for local government, which is being called for by all political parties in local government? Yep. Because without it, services will be lost and jobs will be also cut as well.
Chancellor?
Mr. Speaker, as former local government minister, I know firsthand what a great job our local authorities do. But I would say to the honourable member, the last 2 years, settlements for local government have involved record increases in core spending power. They absolutely have, the highest in over a decade, 2 years in a row. And in this crisis, we've provided £3.7 billion for local authorities, an additional £600 million for infection control. And just last week, at the LGA conference, my right honourable friend, the local government secretary, unveiled a new deal with local government to help provide some compensation for the losses through income that has gone in a sharing arrangement, and it was warmly welcomed by the sector and at the LGA.
Ray Miller.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement and so carefully judging what is needed now as we move forward, particularly to support young people who have been hard hit by recent events. Thousands of young people in my constituency got their first foot on the jobs ladder through apprenticeships at places like the Basingstoke College of Technology, BCOT. How will my right honourable friend's plan for jobs build confidence amongst employers to create and sustain more apprenticeships at this very difficult time?
Chancellor. My right honourable friend is absolutely right about the impact on young people. They are 2.5 times more likely to work in a sector that has been closed down, and she's right, and we know that apprenticeships work. The evidence points in that way. What I can tell her is starting in September, employers will be paid £2,000 for every young apprentice that they take on, a bonus that will incentivise them to create more apprenticeships at this time of vital need.
31 withdrawn, so we're going to Darren Henry.
Mr. Speaker, Alan Gearing has been an independent builder for years in my constituency of Broxtowe. I spoke to him today and he would welcome the Green Homes grant as a chance to cut emissions, but also to support plumbers, builders and other self-employed micro-businesses. Does my right honourable friend agree now is the moment to unleash Green Van Man?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, and I have a feeling that might catch on. But that is exactly what we are trying to do. By our Green Homes grants, by stamp duty cuts, we are getting activity going. We are getting people at work. We are getting work to happen. All of that will be good for our local communities. I know people in Broxtowe will welcome it, and I am thankful to him for coining a phrase.
Let's head to Walthamstow and visit Stella Creasy. Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One word that hasn't been mentioned so far is childcare. And yet we know that 2/3 of women who want to return to work in the next couple of months can't because they can't get any, and that 71% of our voluntary sector childcare agencies are already operating at a loss, risking them closing in the coming weeks. So can the Chancellor set out what funding he is providing now to make sure that parents can get back to work?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, with regard to nurseries, for example, we have already included them in the business rates holidays for this year and also ensured that the funding that they receive from government remain constant throughout this crisis. On top of that, they have access to our other areas of support through bounce back loans and others, but of course we keep everything under review.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend's support for business and workers has safeguarded livelihoods of thousands of my constituents in Orpington. Now more than ever, it is vital that we stick to sound economic principles to help our nation's recovery. Will my right honourable friend therefore reject the Leader of the Opposition's hard-left call for a raid on people's hard-won homes and savings in the form of a new wealth tax, and offer reassurance that the government will continue to focus instead on policies aimed at creating wealth rather than simply plundering it?
Chancellor.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. At this stage, that is absolutely not the policy that we should be pursuing. What we should be pursuing are policies that will get people back to work, to encourage and incentivise businesses to take on new employers, new apprenticeships, and ultimately, he's right, to create the wealth that funds our public services.
Maria Riegel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Chancellor agree with me that it makes no sense to withdraw support from businesses that are viable but can't work at all at present or can't work profitably because of the ongoing effects of health restrictions, such as in aviation, aerospace manufacturing, technical production companies, all of which I have in my constituency? So furlough's going to end, but his job retention bonus won't be available to them because they can't go back to the usual work at the moment. So can he change his one-size-fits-all approach to winding down the employment schemes that have kept many of those companies going in these sectors? Because otherwise, if he doesn't, he's going to simply have deferred a wave of mass redundancies and job failures and business failures of fundamentally sound businesses, which he could save if he makes some adjustments.
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to closed sectors, there are a few remaining closed sectors, and I agree with the Honourable Lady, it's absolutely right that we get those open, and indeed the Prime Minister has said just recently that that's something that he's keen to see happen, and hopefully we can make progress on that soon. With regard to the other sectors, we also do need to adjust to a new economy, which is why it is right that over time furlough winds down gradually and flexibly, and whilst at the same time we do reward employers generously for bringing furloughed employees back, but also have put in place a range of other interventions today to help provide hope and opportunity to young people and others across the country.
Dr. James Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tourism and hospitality sector right across the UK will thoroughly welcome my right honourable friend's announcements today, but the sector in my constituency will only benefit if it's allowed to open. So will he endorse the call by Jim Jones, Chief Executive of North Wales Tourism, for the Welsh Government to open up restaurants, pubs, cafes and indoor attractions by no later than the 19th of July?
Councillor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend knows well how important tourism is to Wales's economy. In fact, it may well be the place that is more reliant on tourism than any other part of the UK from memory. So I can fully understand and sympathise with his desire to get his local tourism businesses open, ready for business, ready to ensure that we can all enjoy summer safely in Wales.
Heading to Merseyside to drop in on Sir George. Howard, Sir George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a response to an earlier question, the Chancellor said that in terms of local government, everything was funding, everything in the garden was rosy. But he will know that local government faces a catastrophic loss of revenue next year as a result of COVID-19, and that will have a devastating effect on jobs and services. Knowsley Council alone faces a loss of income of £19 million, and the Liverpool City region £112 million. So will the Chancellor give a firm commitment that councils will receive full funding for the collection fund shortfalls in 2021 and 22?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, the Local Government Secretary addressed this issue just last week and unveiled a comprehensive agreement with local government to provide loss sharing on income that has been foregone during this crisis.
Ben Effort.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Milton Keynes has a significant consumption economy, and our hospitality sector has been particularly hard hit in this global pandemic, and not just in central Milton Keynes, but in our market towns and indeed in our rural pubs. So will my right honourable friend join me in encouraging everybody in Milton Keynes, and in fact anybody that can travel to our wonderful Milton Keynes and market towns, to eat out to help out?
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend knows well, and he's seen firsthand what a great job his local businesses have done in ensuring that their premises are safe for us to return to. They've made an enormous effort to be able to welcome us back. It is now, as I said, with our new Eat Out to Help Out discount, we can all play our part in helping support their businesses and protect those jobs.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The IFS have said that 13 universities could go bust as a result of COVID-19. This will not only reduce choice and opportunity, but also create unemployment and damage the local economies where they reside. Can the Chancellor state his commitment to build back better and support social mobility by confirming no university will be allowed to collapse?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friends, the Education Secretary and the Business Secretary, have already outlined proposals to engage with universities where they face difficulty. In particular, they've put in place measures to deal with the issue of fewer overseas students being here and to protect our HE research base.
Simon Chubb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for the major steps he's taking to get money flowing through the economy in East Devon and beyond. Cutting VAT on food, accommodation and attractions to 5% has been described as epic by the South West Tourism Alliance. The measures announced today will protect jobs, but perhaps not my waistline, as I wholeheartedly promise to eat out to help out. But will my right honourable friend continue to work with me and South West MPs to protect and strengthen tourism in the best part of Britain?
Chancellor.
I think my North Yorkshire constituents might have something to say about that, Mr. Speaker, but I know how important tourism is to my honourable friend's constituency, similar to so many of our rural constituencies up the country. I'm glad he will be doing his bit to eat out to help out. I hope others will join him, and in doing so we can collectively help protect 2 million jobs across our country.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Chancellor has made welcome announcements on the hospitality and cultural sectors, he said nothing in support of the events industry and those who work in it, despite the Prime Minister promising a timetable for reopening last week. From wedding receptions and conferences to world-famous exhibition centres like Olympia in my constituency, events make a £70 billion contribution to the economy. When will safe, organised events with more than 30 people attending be permitted, as they are in most other countries?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I sympathise with the honourable member and agree the best thing we can do to help these sectors is to get them to reopen. I know it's something the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary are looking at as we speak, and hopefully in the weeks to come, as we progress our fight against this virus, we can continue to reopen all of the closed parts of our economy and progressively loosen some of the restrictions that currently we all face.
Heading to Harlow, where we visit Robert Halfon. Robert Halfon.
I'm over the moon, Mr. Speaker, with the Chancellor's statement today. He's rebuilding our apprenticeships and skills nation and ensuring that young people can climb the important ladder of opportunity. So thank you. And could I just ask him, he knows that the public sector target for apprenticeships is 2.3%. Would he consider raising this target by 5%, which would create 4,000 new apprenticeships in 2021? Based on hiring 50,000 new members of staff in the public sector? And will he also change procurement rules to ensure that any big company bidding for a public sector contract must have at least 5% of their workforce employed as apprentices?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend knows this subject particularly well, so I'm grateful to him for his comments, and I think he makes two very interesting suggestions, and I look forward to discussing with him further.
John Speller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in his reply to the Right Honourable Member for Wokingham, the Chancellor said that leaving the EU gave us the opportunity to reform our procurement regulations. So can the Chancellor tell exactly when he's going to take that opportunity and send out revised guidelines to tell Whitehall and town halls to prioritise British-based companies and British jobs?
Just a minute, somebody's phone's ringing. Can we just check some phones, please? Stopped. Chancellor. Thank
you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, the honourable gentleman will know during the transition period of this year we are still constrained, but he can rest assured that from next year, when we have our full freedom, we can take advantage of all of these things and ensure that our local economies benefit as they should.
Mr. Early. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly welcome the Chancellor's announcements on employment programmes? Jobs are vital going forward. This is exactly the right thing to do. I'm particularly pleased to see the expansion of the sector-based work academies, one of the programmes we launched when I was Employment Minister 10 years ago. I can assure you we don't need to learn too many lessons from the other side, given our record on unemployment in the period up to the crisis. But there's one group I am concerned about on the jobs front, which is those in the aerospace and aviation sectors. Could I ask him, please, to keep them firmly in mind, to look at perhaps whether aviation could be included in the VAT reductions, or to look at other measures of supporting a sector that is vital to our economy but has been very badly affected?
I thank my honourable friend. He's right about the difficulties facing the aviation and aerospace industries, and of course I will keep them very much uppermost in my mind as we go through the next few months. But more generally, pay tribute to the work that he did when he had these briefs. He knows firsthand what it takes to get unemployment down and get people into work and give them that hope and opportunity, and I hope we can build on the success that he had, because we will absolutely need to deliver for our young people in the coming months.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor says he's proud of the government's green record, yet the green measures announced today will cut just 0.14% of UK emissions. Not only that, but this is a government that's still committed to spending £27 billion on new roads. So if he wants to have a green record he can genuinely be proud of, will he start by cancelling that road scheme, put the money into public transport and broadband, and introduce a new rule for UK economy to ensure that all spending and taxation is in line with the Paris Agreement and restoring our natural world?
Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, it is a record to be proud of. We have cut carbon emissions by 40% in the last few years. We are now a world leader in offshore wind. And for the first time ever, last year, we generated the majority of our energy from zero carbon sources. We are building on our progress that has happened under a Conservative government. And whether it's through our Nature for Climate Fund, whether it's through our measures to tackle air quality, whether it's through new technologies like direct air capture or carbon capture and storage, this government will ensure we meet our net zero obligations and do so in a way that creates jobs in every part of our United Kingdom. Luciana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I congratulate my right honourable friend for his excellent statement and his 30 billion jobs plan. It will give hope to thousands of people in my constituency, and I thank him for that. I'm particularly grateful for the commitment to the future of our young people who are hardest hit by this crisis. The Kickstart scheme is for an initial 6 months, and I wonder if that is something he will reconsider and review at the end of that period.
I thank my honourable friend for her support, and again, this is something that she has spent a lot of time in this place championing the futures for young people. I'm pleased to tell her that it will be longer than 6 months. The Kickstart scheme will be open for bidding, hopefully, at the end of this month, beginning of next month. The first new Kickstarters will start in the autumn, but it is a scheme that will run at least until the end of next year, and hopefully, if it is popular, we can get as many as hundreds of thousands of young people part of the Kickstarter programme, and I hope she and her constituency can be a champion for it.
Stephen Flynn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. £350 billion. That's how much the UK Treasury has coined from Scotland's oil and gas sector over the decades. So I say to the Chancellor, it is time to give back. When will his government finally stop dithering and instead deliver on an oil and gas sector deal to protect jobs now, but also to create new sustainable jobs for Aberdeen's future?
Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, Scotland has benefited extraordinarily from the interventions that this government has put in place during this crisis. I talked earlier about the Barnett consequentials and the billions of pounds, but more importantly, about the ability for us to act as one united kingdom. It is at a time like this when the importance of that has never been more to the fore. And you talked about oil and gas. I'm happy to acknowledge the difficulties in that sector. I know the Business Secretary is in talks with that sector. Mechanisms have been put in place before, and again, we keep all of these things under review, and if we need to make more interventions in the future, of course we will.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for his statement and also for his kind words that he's considering my proposals on recapitalising the SME sector. I wanted to ask him about his infrastructure funding of, I think, 5.6 billion that he's committed to today. Could he expand on how he feels that we can get infrastructure delivered more quickly, whether that be through dealing with planning regulations or indeed other practical obstacles, because that's the way how we can make sure that money is most effective?
Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It's one thing to sit here and approve budgets for things. It's more important that we get on and actually deliver them. We need to make sure that our community see tangible improvement in what is happening around them, and particularly given the economic situation we face at the moment, there is a premium on doing things quickly. That's why we brought £5 billion of projects forward, and it's why we have initiated Project Speed to look at our entire process, end-to-end, procurement, planning, construction, regulations, approvals, to ensure that we can deliver for our communities as quickly as possible.
Let's head to Wales with an audio-only Beth Winter. Beth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Richard Murphy, a professor in political economy at City University in London, says that the government has the potential to raise £174 billion a year if wealth was taxed at the same rate of income. That could cover the cost of the job retention scheme for over 12 months, according to the latest estimates from the Office of Budget Responsibility. Does the Chancellor believe the time is right for a radical overhaul of our taxation system in order to fulfil the Prime Minister's levelling up promise? Or is the truth that we're not really all in this together?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, no, I don't believe now is the time, or will ever be the time, for a wealth tax. Now is the time to recognise the challenge we face, the acute phase of unemployment, and now is the time to act decisively, with compassion, to provide hope and opportunity for the hundreds of thousands, especially of young people, who are at risk of scarring and losing the future that they deserve. That's why we've put in place the measures today. That's what the focus should be on.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate my right honourable friend for his statement. Young people are perhaps more at risk from the economic impact of coronavirus, so I was very pleased to see the Kickstart programme. Does he agree with me that it's through a comprehensive package of support for apprenticeships, traineeships and other support too that will allow young people to acquire the skills they need to take the opportunities of the future?
Chancellor.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We cannot afford to lose this generation. They cannot be the generation that is defined and scarred by coronavirus. And that is why, as he rightly identified, we have put in place a suite of interventions, from traineeships to apprenticeships to the Kickstart Fund, all designed to help that generation to a better future and a brighter future.
Let's head to Newport and visit Jessica Morden. Jessica Morden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to Step Change Debt Charity, 4.5 million people have lost income and accumulated £6 billion worth of debt in arrears on household bills during the pandemic. Will the Chancellor ensure that economic recovery plans include also a strategy to support people in unavoidable coronavirus-related financial difficulties?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I know my colleague, the Financial Secretary, has been abreast of this issue for a while, and has just reminded me that we have invested, I think, £37 million in debt advisory services during this time. I also know that he is taking forward initiatives on our breathing space initiative. It's something that he very passionately believes in, and I wholeheartedly support those efforts.
Richard Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor has answered many specific questions, but I'd like to commend the overall tone of his statement, which he began by saying that he would be unencumbered by dogma, but with a simple desire to do what is right. And his responses has oftentimes mentioned the social justice imperative behind his plan for jobs, which I think will strike many in the country as absolutely right. But can I just echo the comments by his and my right honourable friend, the member for Bromsgrove, about the need, when we come to the fore, to look at ways in which the overall debt as a burden on the GDP of the country can be brought under control.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to our honourable friend for those comments, and he's absolutely right about how I've approached this. As I said, for me, this is not just a question of economics, it is a question of values, and we demonstrate those through the actions that we take and the people that we prioritise. But he is also right to highlight the importance of sustainability in our public finances, something that he knows I very passionately care about and have spoken about repeatedly from these benches, and he can rest assured that as we come to the autumn, we will set our public finances on a path back to sustainability.
Darren Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor failed today to set out sector-specific help for British manufacturing. In doing so, he is gambling with an important industry and making the UK less competitive compared to countries like Germany, France, and the United States. So perhaps the Chancellor can set out for the House today what it is he has against British workers making British aeroplanes, British cars and British steel.
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not entirely sure about the tone of the honourable member's question. The support schemes we've put in place have benefited equally all sectors and all workers in every region and part of our United Kingdom. So manufacturing companies I know have actually been large users of the furlough scheme and are very grateful for it. They are now in the process of bringing those workers back and adding shifts and are grateful also for the flexibility that that scheme provides. But what they're actually more interested in when I speak to them is about our ambitious commitments to R&D. Our plans to double R&D investment, working closely with the private sector in doing that, helping create the innovations that will drive growth, productivity and employment tomorrow.
Andrea Litz.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend is doing a fantastic job in both promoting and protecting jobs. But of course, to really trade our way out of this recession, we will need to look at the future, and I know he is keen as I am to see a green recovery. So does he agree that COP26 next year offers us a really good opportunity to show UK global leadership, and that by working now with international partners in big projects in areas like battery storage, whether it's offshore wind or carbon capture usage and storage, those are areas that really can create green jobs for the future?
Chancellor.
Well, my right honourable friend knows this area better than most, and she's absolutely right. This is an opportunity for us to demonstrate global leadership, and she can rest assured that we will do, particularly on the finance track, where I'm responsible for and working closely with Mark Carney, the Prime Minister's envoy, and we're trying to put in place an ambitious set of goals that we can help deliver. But she also talked about our leadership in particular areas, and those are things that we must double down on: offshore wind, carbon capture and storage. We can lead the world in developing these technologies.
Heading north to Scotland with Brendan O'Hara. Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although I welcome the temporary reduction in VAT, it doesn't go nearly far enough to help the tourism and hospitality businesses in my already economically fragile Argyll and Bute constituency. Surely, to ensure that these otherwise robust businesses are still there and are ready to go again next year, they need an extension of furlough to be able to retain their staff and have access to grants rather than having to rely on the business interruption loan scheme.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to repeat my comments on ever-extending furlough scheme. I don't think that's the right thing to do. With regard to grants, what I would say is that we provided grants, specifically £10,000 or £25,000 to businesses in the retail, hospitality and tourism sector, and it's why those businesses did not necessarily have to use loans if they didn't want to. They received that support early in this crisis because we acknowledged the particular difficulty that they would face. But I would say to them, it's not just the VAT cut, which was one of the significant, if not the significant asks from the industry. The Eat Out to Help Out discount will be something that will drive tons of business and protect millions of jobs.
Sir Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor spoke about finding a new balance between safety and normality. Isn't it time to look at moving away from the guidance that people should work from home, if possible, towards guidance that they should go to work if it's safe to do so? And can I also urge him to reflect over the summer on whether a cut or suspension of air passenger duty isn't the best way to get the aviation sector back to health for next year?
Councillor.
Well, my right honourable friend as always champions the aviation industry. He's right to do so, and as he knows, we are committed to a review of aerospace taxation, so I will certainly bear that in mind. And with regard to the guidance, I share with him an impatience to get our lives back to normal. I know what a difference it will make, not just to those businesses, but all the ancillary businesses that are used to office workers being in their offices. It is something that, of course, we should hopefully look to address in the coming weeks and months as we progressively move back to a new normal.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having campaigned for many years for a 5% rate of VAT for the visitor economy, can I welcome that part of the Chancellor's announcement today? Can I ask him, though, just please not to close the door on the idea of extending or even making that permanent? He will have the best possible data now to test against previous studies that have showed that that rate could actually bring a better return of revenue for the Treasury. Because I fear that even for my constituency, where we have a highly seasonal visitor economy, Many of the businesses won't benefit from it because they're not intending to reopen again till next spring.
Councillor.
Mr. Speaker, I know this will make a big difference. It is important, though, that it is time limited. That is in keeping in common with most other countries that have done something similar, have also run theirs through to the end of the year. I will happily bear all future tax suggestions in mind, but in the short term, I hope that his constituents and his businesses get the boost in confidence and demand that they will need.
Anthony Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's bold, it's imaginative, it's well targeted. I'd like to congratulate my right honourable friend the Chancellor on this package, which will do so much to promote jobs and growth across the country. I very much welcome the cut in VAT and in stamp duty. But most welcome of all is the Kickstarter scheme, which brings hope to young people in these difficult times. Unlike Labour's Future Jobs Fund, it's not just focused on the public sector. And does my right honourable friend agree with me that it will have most impact? It will have most impact if it's fully embraced by the private sector and that private businesses take advantage of the opportunity to take on young workers.
Yeah, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It's important that we provide as many opportunities for young people as possible. One thing we want to improve and build upon is the involvement of the private sector. I hope this becomes a galvanising cry to businesses, small and large, up and down the country, to take on a Kickstarter to help play their part in the recovery. And I know this is an area that he has strong experience of from his time in London. I appreciate the advice and suggestions he's given me about how to encourage and incentivise businesses to create jobs, create opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I take the opportunity to say thank you, Chancellor? I'm already receiving text messages from my constituents, from the business community and from ordinary men and women saying thank you to the Chancellor for some of the measures that have been announced today. So thank you, sir. This is a very important statement that you have made, and it will benefit many of my constituents. Last week, the Prime Minister, standing there, told us that the government was going to invest massively in hydrogen power. You had me on tender hooks. I was waiting for the statement. I was waiting for you to tell me the new hydrogen strategy is about to be announced. It hasn't come, so you still have me on tender hooks. Will you now commit solidly, on behalf of the government, on behalf of the Treasury, to unlock a strategy that will unlock 1.5 billion of investment money in the whole of the United Kingdom, invest billions of pounds into this new strategy, and will allow us to commit as a nation to this new, clean, green technology? And will the Chancellor meet with me and colleagues from across...
Order. Mr. Paisley. No, not thank you. You're going to stay on the tender hooks. You'll be on them for a long time if you do that again. Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the honourable member for his very kind words, and I'm glad it will make a difference to his constituents, as I hope communities up and down the country across our United Kingdom. On hydrogen, what I can say is I am absolutely not in a position to steal my boss's thunder, so I will leave the future announcements on hydrogen to him. But he can rest assured that it's something that both the Prime Minister and I, and indeed the Treasury, will take very seriously.
Mark O'Loughlin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be brief. Last week, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, accepted my pleading to come and visit Dudley. He delivered his visionary speech and he saw for himself the building of the Institute of Technology that will actually future-proof people for jobs for the future. Will my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, also come and visit Dudley, please, and support this scheme, as well as our ambition for a university campus, as I want Dudley people to be jobs ready?
She didn't go long. Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to accept my honourable friend's intervention and invitation, but he's absolutely right. The best way for us to provide opportunity for people is to give them the skills and the education that they need, whether that's through universities, institutes of technology, further education, schools, apprenticeships, however it may be. Providing people with that knowledge is what will enable them to build a better future for their lives. That's something that he feels very passionately, I feel very passionately about, and we will, as a government, deliver that.
Let us go and visit Seema Malhotra. Seema Malhotra.
Mr. Speaker, I am genuinely surprised the Chancellor hasn't today brought forward a flexible furlough scheme for aviation, which he knows will have a longer recovery tail. And so I do hope that as he keeps in touch with the industry, he will also keep in touch with MPs from aviation communities for place-based support. Now, he is right that young people and others will need support to access to jobs, and I welcome the Kickstart scheme. but with other experts estimating that over 30,000 work coaches are needed. An unemployment sector hit a record high in October, with the Secretary of State expecting 4,500 new work coaches to be in place by then. Is he concerned that we won't have enough in place to meet demand when we most need it? And what more does he think can be done?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I actually commend and applaud all the efforts the Work and Pension Secretary and her team are doing at the moment. Just for reference, they are doubling the number of work coaches and doing it in record time. We will have 13,500 in just 8 months, a 100% increase. It's worth comparing that to what happened in 2008 to 9, when DWP recruited just 10,000 and it took them 12 months, a 60% increase. So we will go as fast as is necessary, but no one can accuse us of not doing as much as we can, as quickly as we can, to provide people with the support that they need.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Make no mistake, what the Chancellor has announced today to save a generation of young people from bearing the brunt of this economic crisis is incredibly positive and to be welcome. Can I welcome in particular the determination of my right honourable friend to avoid the past mistakes from employment schemes where we saw too many examples of young people in work placements with not doing meaningful work, with poor oversight, poor management and no opportunity to really build their skill levels. Make this scheme, the Kickstart scheme, the best employment support scheme we've ever seen.
Chancellor.
Well, I very much thank my right honourable friend for that support, and of course this is an area he will know well. He is absolutely right. There's no point in doing this if the work placements are of low quality. It's important we get that right as we construct the bidding process, and I'd be very grateful to him if he'd sit down with me so we can get his thoughts on how best to achieve that.
Let us head up to Wesley with Barbara Keeley. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join my honourable friend, the Shadow Chancellor, in urging an end to poverty pay for our care workers. Today's interventions in the job market are welcome, but there is still no recognition in pay for the fantastic job done in this crisis by our care staff. Rather than blaming care staff, as the government has done this week, will the Chancellor commit to showing these staff some parity of esteem with NHS staff and pay them a real living wage of £10 an hour?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I join with my colleagues in paying enormous tribute to those on the front line during this crisis who have done an extraordinary job under incredibly difficult circumstances, deserve not just our thanks but our praise, and they have it. In terms of public sector pay, we're in the midst of the second year of inflation-busting pay rises for almost 1 million people, and with regard to social care, who are funded through local authorities, as I've said, local government has enjoyed 2 years of record increases in core spending power, which hopefully will help find its way to the front line.
Mr. Speaker, can I make a suggestion to my right honourable friend about one way in which he could help fund some of today's expenditure commitments, and that is to implement without further delay the cap on public sector exit payments. Our right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, promised on the 13th of March that this would be done by bringing forward secondary legislation before the summer recess. That hasn't happened, and can my right honourable friend therefore allay concerns that this process is being sabotaged by Treasury mandarins, the Sir Humphreys, who have for 5 years successfully resisted this proposal, which was actually supported by this House in legislation 5 years ago.
Chancellor.
Thank you. I remember when I had the Chief Secretary's job, we discussed this very topic, and my right honourable friend is right to keep highlighting it. What I can tell him is, as the Chief Secretary said, I believe very recently, we are well underway to implementing this measure, and will bring forward the appropriate legislation in due course.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Given that councils have a statutory responsibility to set a balanced annual budget, even the further help announced last week won't be enough for councils like Leeds and many others. So can I urge the Chancellor to look again at what the Treasury can do to help fill the remaining gap? In the case of Leeds, it's £63 million, because without further assistance, then the council will, by law, have to start cutting jobs, and that could include non-statutory services that have been so important in providing support to communities affected by COVID.
Chancellor.
Well, My honourable friend, the member is right to highlight the important work that Leeds Council plays, having spent some time there seeing how they do early intervention and children's services in particular. I was very impressed when I did the local government job. But I would say is that the local government secretary has been engaging extensively with the sector. We have put billions of pounds of incremental support in place. Of course it is going to be difficult. It's difficult for all of us, whether it's business or local authority, to get through this time. But considerable support has been put in place. And in particular last week, the announcement on a loss-sharing arrangement with central government for the income and fees and charges, I think, is an important step in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for the steps he's announced today, particularly focused on young people, which I think shows yet again that the Conservatives do what works, not just what might sound good, even if it means tough decisions in the short term. Can he confirm that of the support given so far, proportionately, the lowest income families in our society have benefited the most from the support given so far?
Councillor.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The analysis published today shows that we've reduced the scale of losses for working households by up to 2/3 in general, but the support for the poorest households has been the highest, and he will find that in the distribution analysis published today. It demonstrates what we believe is important at a time like this, to protect the most vulnerable in our society. I know that's something he very deeply feels, and I share that feeling with him.
Limbo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The country expects us to pull together now to get our country back on its feet. And in that spirit, let me welcome the investment the Chancellor has announced today for young people and for the hospitality trade. My observation, though, is that the money he's brought forward for capital is only about 5 to 6% of the budget that he's earmarked for the next 4 or 5 years. What that means in my region is 50p per person per week invested in so-called shovel-ready projects. That, frankly, is not enough. But crucially, there is a gaping hole in this announcement today for where support for manufacturing should be. We have 330,000 people across the West Midlands on furlough in construction, manufacturing and the car business. The sharp ends to the furlough arrangements, I think, will put many people out of work, and there is no subsidy scheme for new cars in the way that they've announced in France and Germany. We want to be the capital of green manufacturing. What I fear from today is we're now looking at manufacturing meltdown.
Councillor.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to capital investment, it's important to put in context what our existing budgets were for this year. £88 billion is what I announced at the budget for this year. That represents a 20% increase on our capital investment plans the previous year, and represents, as a percentage of GDP, the highest amount that we've invested in capital in almost, well, since the 70s. So the starting base level for our capital investment is already exceptionally high. We have brought £5 billion of additional projects forward into this year, but taken in the round, it will be the most we've ever spent on capital in real terms for a very, very long time.
Trebedley.
Will this young, vigorous Chancellor not be too cruel to an old Thatcherite for making this deeply unfashionable point, that there are no long-term good subsidised jobs? As we saw with the new Labour make-work jobs and with furlough, sooner or later they are subject to fraud and market distortion. So will the Chancellor confirm that the only good long-term jobs are based on the government ensuring deregulation, market flexibility, tax cuts on entrepreneurship, and that we have a plan to repay the national debt? Otherwise, as a previous speaker once said, there will be no more money.
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly agree with my right honourable friend. He's absolutely right. These interventions are specific for the moment that we face now. They provide support for young people at this moment of acute crisis. In the long term, it is only a dynamic market economy that can provide sustainable long-term employment for young people and beyond. And he is absolutely right. In the medium term, once we get through this crisis, we must return our public finances to a sustainable place.
Up to Scotland and visiting Margaret Furry. Margaret Furry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Community Access to Cash scheme recently announced that Cambuslang in my constituency was going to become one of their pilot areas, which will bring back much needed payment facilities to a community which has lost several bank branches. The Chancellor has promised legislation to improve access to cash, and it is needed urgently in light of the economic downturn caused by the coronavirus. Can the Chancellor outline when he will bring forward this vital legislation to protect cash use support small business and boost recovery of our high streets?
Chancellor.
Well, the honourable member makes a good and fair point about the importance of cash, particularly in our rural communities. And what I can tell her is my honourable friend, the Economic Secretary, is very much on top of this, is just conducting roundtables as we speak in the coming weeks with the industry, and as we have committed to, we will bring forward legislation.
Steve Brown. Thank you. Thanks to the Chancellor for bringing some real hope today. Now, early years providers have really played their part in getting us through this pandemic, but it's certainly true that reduced attendance for them combined with increased costs is taking its toll. This, of course, as the Chancellor and I have discussed before, is on top of the fact that this was a sector struggling and really experiencing market failure, as it has been for quite a long time. So jobs, jobs, jobs is fantastic and is right, but it has to be backed by childcare that actually exists. So will the Chancellor give me some time, only has to be a short amount of time, 15 minutes would be fantastic, so that we can set out the challenge this sector faces and some of the suggested solutions that we have.
Chancellor. Well, I know this is a matter very close to my honourable friend's heart, and he's brought it up with me before. I'd be very delighted to give him the time he asked for to discuss this matter further.
Justin Mathers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, Airbus announced 1,700 jobs are going in this country. They cannot afford to wait for a bonus payment in January. So what is the Chancellor going to do to save those jobs now?
Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear. I cannot save every single job. It is a tragic fact of what we have done to our economy over the past few months means that there will be job losses. Unemployment will rise. It is something that we cannot avoid, but what we can do is put in place a range of interventions to provide new hope and new opportunity for those who lose their jobs, so they can find either the skills, the work placements or new jobs they need to provide a better future for themselves and their family, and that's what we will devote all our energies to in the coming weeks and months.
Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very grateful to the Chancellor of this statement and the enormous package that has been of money that has been put into our constituencies in the economy. I'm keen to see even more money made available for us to spend on the things that really matter in the UK. And one of the ways that we can do that is to cut down on fraud and on corruption. As you know, as chair of the APPG for whistleblowing, I'm very keen that we should take this forward. Would you join me tomorrow for our webinar, where we will be looking at ways that international governments are actually tackling this, bringing forward programmes so that we can actually deal with this problem of corruption and fraud. And also, can I thank him for everything that he's done on tackling furlough fraud, which has been a real issue within our economy.
Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to the work that my honourable friend does in this area. She's absolutely right that we must tackle corruption and fraud in procurement. It costs billions, if not tens of billions of pounds. That's money lost to the Exchequer that we can use to fund public services, and it also means that our local authorities in particular don't get the quality of services that they need to provide for their residents. She's absolutely right to focus on it. I very much look forward to hearing her what proposals she might have for us to take forward.
I said to Belfast South and visit Claire Hannah. Claire Hannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Chancellor for advancing some very important mechanisms, although I do share the concerns of others about those who have fallen through the cracks, like new freelancers and those in precarious contracts. But, Chancellor, given the need to protect confidence in spending and given the opportunity that historically low interest-based rates hold, would the Chancellor consider speaking to the banks, particularly those in which the government have a majority stake, about offering temporary lower mortgage products? This could potentially save hundreds of pounds for the average household, and would he be open to meeting with me to discuss this idea?
I tell the honourable member that my honourable friend, the Economic Secretary, is in close contact with the banking sector and has put in place and deserves enormous credit for the measures that he's put in place to provide forbearance to people during this difficult time. He's very happy to meet with the honourable member, but with particular to mortgage, he put in place a scheme that provided mortgage holidays to people, and I think about 1 in 6 mortgages were able to benefit from that. I know that's millions of people who will have welcomed that relief, and I pay tribute to him for the excellent work that he has done.
To Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you're question 74, it's difficult to think of something that hasn't been mentioned. But it's a fair bet that up until now no one has quoted from the Grimsby Telegraph, which last week said, after the Prime Minister's speech, "Now put your money where your mouth is, Boris." And I think the Chancellor has in fact delivered on that today. The article finished by saying, give us the opportunity and we'll show you what the country can be achieved. And I think the support given to businesses today will verify that. Could I also urge the Chancellor to consider yet again the Freeport issue for Immingham and Grimsby? The consultation ends next week. Please don't waste time mulling over the consultation responses. Deliver Freeport status for Immingham and Grimsby.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right as always about the importance of private enterprise driving our growth forward. He's right to highlight a Freeport. I know what a difference it would make to his community. I remember when I met his local businesses, they were hungry to take up that opportunity to attract investment, to create new jobs, drive up productivity, and I look forward to working with him in the coming months on trying to bring that to reality.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A 9-month cut to stamp duty is welcome, but without an injection of new houses, it risks forcing up prices, making it harder, not easier, for first-time buyers to buy homes. This should have been an opportunity to inject capital into the housing market, but also into social housing and building houses that people can afford to live in, creating opportunities for new jobs, new apprenticeships, new skills that people can use in the future. So will he go away and have a look at putting some money, particularly into building social housing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the good news is we already have, and the Prime Minister announced it and I talked about it at budget. The Affordable Homes Programme increased from £9 billion to £12 billion over the next few years, a significant uplift in the amount of new housing delivery. I think 180,000 new homes from memory. And with regard to the benefits of stamp duty, the evidence we have, both from economists and HMRC, is that the majority of the benefit in the stamp duty cut last time around in 08-09 accrued to the buyers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Hospitality and Tourism, can I warmly thank the Chancellor for his announcements today. Thank you for listening to the sector and for what you have delivered, which will undoubtedly save thousands of jobs and tens of thousands of jobs and thousands of businesses. The Chancellor has done his bit. Businesses across the country have done their bit in getting ready to make our bars, pubs, restaurants and hotels safe to welcome customers. Does he share my view that what we now need is for the British people to do their bit, to get out and spend money in our bars and restaurants? And would he join me in inviting everyone to come to Cornwall this summer?
Thank you. There are fewer greater champions for the tourism and hospitality industry than my honourable friend, and I know he will be pleased about today's announcements, but he's absolutely right. Our local businesses in all our constituencies have worked unbelievably hard over the past few weeks to adapt how they do business, to invest in new things, to make their premises safe for us, and that is why today we introduced the Eat Out to Help Out discount. We can all play our part in supporting these businesses and protecting these jobs.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a former employment minister in Northern Ireland, I do welcome the Barna consequentials that allow us to shape our own local response around youth unemployment, apprenticeships and traineeships. But could I ask the Chancellor, what analysis has the Treasury done around where redundancies have been occurring and where they're likely to occur over the coming months? And surely that information should guide the use of that £9 billion for the furlough bonus to be more targeted around those sectors that are going to face longer problems but will have sustainable futures, such as aerospace and the creative industries.
Mr. Speaker, we have published breakdowns of the furlough population by region, constituency and age to give a sense of the types of people who are affected. I know one thing that does come out of that is the importance in rural and coastal communities being particularly impacted by numbers of people on furlough. That is because they're disproportionately reliant on the hospitality and tourism sectors, which is why today's interventions are targeted and will make the biggest difference to the most number of people.
Daniel Kowczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to the misery that COVID has brought to our constituencies, there are over 46 constituencies like mine on the River Severn that also faced devastation from flooding earlier this year, a double whammy for our local businesses. The River Severn Partnership has been formed in conjunction with all the councils down the River Severn and the support of local MPs. I've been led to believe by the Environment Agency that an announcement is imminent on additional support for the River Severn Partnership in order to secure a more holistic solution to the management of this river. I very much hope the Chancellor will agree with me that when it comes to the recovery of our economy, making sure that our constituencies are not repeatedly flooded is a very important aspect of that economic recovery.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It's something the Committee for Climate Change also mentioned, and that is why in budget we doubled the amount of investment that we put into flood defences. It is the right thing to do. It will build resilience in our communities, protect our natural environment. I don't know the specifics of the timing of the announcement that he alludes to, but I'm happy to go away and take a look at it. I know how important it is to him and his constituents that we're able to protect them from the devastating flooding that we've seen in recent years.
Let's head to Lewisham and visit Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Disabled people and charities are concerned about the lack of support available to enable high-risk individuals to return to work safely when the shielding programme ends. Ministers have said they expect employers to do the right thing and ensure that workplaces are COVID secure. Where it's impossible for an employer to do this, individuals could be forced to put their health at risk just to make ends meet. Will the government consider extending the full job retention scheme for those who are not able to return to work safely?
Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, based on the medical advice, it has been determined that the shielding population can return to work safely after the end of the month. That's something that's already been clear and announced, and we have published extensive guidance and guidelines for workplaces to make them safe, so people can take comfort from that. If there are more things that we need to do, I'm sure the Honourable Lady will send them to the Business Secretary for the workplaces, or indeed me, and we'll happily take a look at them.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the many businesses in South Dorset, can I thank my right honourable friend for the furlough scheme and welcome his statement today. Surely our aim is to help many in the struggling private sector, because as I'm sure my right honourable friend will agree, and the opposition need to be continually reminded, it is they that generate the jobs and prosperity that we need and the tax that pays for our public services.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It is, in the long term, the market economy that will provide the growth and prosperity we need. It will provide the jobs that we need. But it is important that we provide support to those businesses in the short term, given the disruption they've faced. And I know his local businesses and many others will welcome the jobs retention bonus to help reward and incentivise them to do the right thing, to stand by their workers at this time, bring them back, and look forward to a brighter future.
Let's head to Ealing and drop in on James Murray. James Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 25th of June, a Treasury direction in relation to the coronavirus job retention scheme made clear that integral to the purpose of the scheme is that the grant is used by the employer to continue the employment of employees. Can the Chancellor therefore confirm that British Airways would be liable to pay back any taxpayers' money used to furlough staff who the company chose during that furlough period to put on notice of redundancy?
Mr. Speaker, there are procedures in place for any employees to talk to HMRC if they believe they themselves have been the victim of fraud, or if the company they work for has not acted in a way keeping with the guidance. And I would urge any employees of any company, if they feel that that has happened, they should take up with the HMRC hotline. The details are online.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Chancellor, firstly for, as far as I can work out, subsidising me to go down the pub. Very, very welcome indeed. But also for the effect which his announcement about tourism VAT will have on hundreds of businesses and thousands of jobs in my constituency of Weston-super-Mare. Can I, though, suggest to him that over the medium term, the best guarantee of jobs and employment has to be to have competitive businesses, and can I therefore urge him to consider over the more medium term sharpening our competition laws and opening up our market economy to tougher competition as the best long-term guarantee of employment for everyone?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Just to clarify, the Eat Out to Help Out discount won't apply to alcohol, but 90-something% of pubs serve food, so you can still go to the pub and enjoy it. But he's absolutely right about competition policy. It's important that we have dynamic markets in this country. We need dynamic competition to create jobs, create productivity in order to get the outcomes we want. I'm very happy to talk with him, and I know he has expertise in this area, to get his thoughts if there are things we can do to update and turbocharge our competition policy to make sure it's fit, especially for the digital age.
Let us go up and visit Drew Hendry. Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor said at the beginning of his statement that no one will be left without hope. So what does he say to the hundreds of thousands of businesses and sole traders excluded from support during this pandemic crisis? Many of them in seasonal businesses facing effectively 3 winters of trading. They can't afford extra debt. So isn't it time now to convert some of the money put aside for loans to grants to support this sector?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member talks about seasonal businesses and whether they haven't had or have had support. He may have missed the fact that we have just cut that for those sectors by 20% to 5% for the next 6 months and just provided an Eat Out to Help Out discount for the country to enjoy discounted meals to protect those businesses and protect the employment in them. I think that's probably the best thing we can do for seasonal businesses.
Baker.
Mr. Speaker, with his plan for jobs, my right honourable friend has, like Roosevelt, given a masterclass in economic interventionism, but it is quite expensive. Can he reassure me that he has got a contingency in case the Independent Bank of England needs to change its stance of monetary policy because inflation has begun to rise?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as ever, my honourable friend is right to remind us about the importance of monetary economics, and he's also right to focus on the long-term sustainability of our public finances. Whilst in the short term, it is right to act in this way to prevent long-term damage and scarring to our economy that would create an ongoing larger structural deficit. Once we get through this crisis, we must retain and sustain public finances. We will return them to a position of sustainability over the medium term. I can assure him of that, but in the short term I'm confident that this is the right thing to do to protect the long-term health of our economy.
85 withdrawn. We go to James Daly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the chair of the APPG for Youth Employment, can I warmly welcome the fantastic package of support for young people in our country announced by the Chancellor today. Bury College in my constituency has a proven record for delivering sector-based work academies with 600 young people currently in construction and engineering placements. Would the Chancellor meet with me and the fantastic Principal Charlie Dean to discuss how Bury College can expand the range and number of placements on offer for young people, transforming their opportunities in the jobs market?
Well, I'm very excited to hear about what's going on at Bury College. My honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of youth employment, an area that he knows very well. I think probably the Work and Pension Secretary would be delighted to sit down with him as we announce today our tripling of sector-based work academies and make sure that we can figure out how many of those can find their way to my honourable friend's constituency as possible.
Kerry McCarthy. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My colleagues have also mentioned that there's a real lack of sector-specific support in this statement. Can I ask particularly about car manufacturing? France has now announced increases to EV subsidies, making them the most generous in Europe, and a means-tested scrappage scheme. Germany has doubled its EV subsidies. What is the Chancellor going to do to get car manufacturing back on its feet, but also to help us meet our climate objective and the Committee on Climate Change recommendation that we bring forward the ban on new diesel and petrol vehicle sales till 2032? They recommend a zero-emission vehicle mandate. I hear nothing from the Chancellor as to what he is going to do to support manufacturing and support our climate objectives.
Madam Deputy Speaker, at budget we announced about £1 billion of support for low-emission vehicles in various different ways, including a £400 million charging infrastructure fund to spread the development of charge points across this country. I think that underlies our commitment to ensure we transition properly to our net zero environment, starting with our transportation industry.
James Sunderland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it strikes me that this is a perfect opportunity to review our investment and procurement strategies in a range of sectors. Does the Chancellor agree with me that we must stop spending so much taxpayers' money overseas, that it's time to build British, buy British and sell British?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is right to point out the opportunities we will now have after leaving the EU to tweak our procurement rules to make sure that, of course, we will always get value for money for the taxpayer, but we can do so in a way that supports our local economies and supports, especially at a time right now, local jobs.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Although it has and still does exclude many people, it must be acknowledged that support delivered directly via the Treasury, such as the Job Retention Scheme, has been delivered quickly. This support is not allocated based on proportion of population or the cost of support or the level of productivity, but on the need of those who apply and qualify. This is how devolution can operate. So can the Chancellor provide us with detailed figures so that we can assess exactly how much financial support has been delivered from the Treasury to the people and businesses in Scotland and the other devolved nations?
Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, those numbers have been published, and as I said earlier, £4.6 billion is the total amount of Barnett funding that is provided to Scotland throughout this entire crisis. The block grant adjustment resulting from the stamp duty cut will be finalised after we have final costings from the OBR.
Finally, Sir Desmond Swain.
Madam Deputy Speaker, after that package and that performance, the only reasonable thing I can say to my right honourable friend is remember, O Caesar, that you are mortal. However, it would be a great shame if the effectiveness of his measures were to be undermined in the New Forest, with the loss of £16 million at least to local traders, by the company to whom the Forestry Commission handed a monopoly, refusing to open its campsites. Will he summon Forestry England and threaten them with the rough end of a pineapple and instruct them to use their position on the board and their substantial shareholding to get those campsites open?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you to my right honourable friend. I share his passion for getting our campsites open. Hopefully, an extra incentive today will be the cut in VAT from 20% to 5%, which extends to campsites as well as caravan sites and B&Bs and hotels. I'm not sure if I have the powers to summon anyone, but I will be delighted to bring whatever influence I can to bear on his particular matter and look forward to discussing it with him further.
Thank you. In a moment, I will call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move a provisional collection of taxes motion. Copies of the motion are available in the Vote Office. In accordance with Standing Order number 51 on Ways and Means motions, a Minister of the Crown may, without notice, make a motion for giving provisional statutory effect to any proposals in pursuance of Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, and the question on such a motion shall be put forthwith. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the Provisional Collection of Taxes motion formally.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move.
The question is, as set out in the Provisional Collection of Taxes motion, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I am suspending the House for 3 minutes.